The rise of the Spanish Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26. Great expansion of royal industry. While Spain's reform and construction were in full swing, Carlo was already deploying his own public opinion empire. As early as in Italy, Carlo had asked Laurent to acquire Spanish newspapers, but they were kept on a very small scale. Now that he has become the king of Spain, it is time to expand the newspaper company in Spain and establish a highly influential newspaper organization like Italy's El Sol. The Italian newspaper El Sol had a good name, and because of its promotion of the monarchy, it had gained some popularity in Spain, so Carlo naturally copied the name of El Sol. In October 1869, El Sol was officially established in Madrid and became Carlo's first major business in Spain. The development potential around Madrid is not much worse than that of northern Italy. Carlo hopes that the new Spanish Sun will become a major newspaper with a daily circulation of 20,000 copies within 2 years. In addition to the Spanish Sun, a newspaper used to build its reputation. Carlo also asked Laurent to quietly acquire more than a dozen small newspapers to expand the number of newspapers in his opinion empire. These newspapers are also scattered across Spain and are able to influence more Spanish families. In addition to the public opinion layout, Carlo also officially began the major expansion of royal assets. If you want to realize your plans in a Spain that is facing internal and external troubles, sufficient funds are essential. Although the newspaper could make a little money, it was just a drop in the bucket for the royal palace, which had huge expenses. The Bourbon dynasty's former lands and most of its properties were confiscated by the government. Apart from taking over the royal palace of Madrid and some other castles and estates, Carlo did not get much of the valuable properties and lands. At present, the income from Carlo's industries can only barely cover the expenses of the royal palace, and this is when Carlo has not formed a guard. Whether it is for the formation of the guards or for greater reform and expansion in the future, it is necessary to invest in more industries. As the first step in expanding the royal assets, Carlo set his sights on the food and wine industries. Needless to say, food is a necessary commodity required for humans to maintain a normal life. It is a consumable and basically has no problems with sales. The status of wine in the West is self-evident. As an alcoholic beverage sought after by the upper class and indispensable to the lower class, wine has no worries about sales in Europe, and banquets among the nobility alone can consume a large amount of wine. Later, Spain became the world's third largest wine producing region, and it was very suitable for the development of the wine industry. The wine produced by Carlo's winery was basically not worried about sales. After all, a king's private winery is naturally more impressive than those ordinary wineries. In mid-October 1869, United Foods was officially established in Madrid. Carlo acquired a flour mill in Madrid and planned to expand it into a food processing plant based on the flour mill. What should be produced? Carlo actually already had a plan in mind, which was something similar to fast food in later generations. But it's not very complicated. It's basically just 2 large slices of bread with a little meat paste and jam in the middle. It's mainly good value for money. In this regard, food practitioners in later generations have opened up too many new paths. Carlo has many ways to reduce the cost of food while making the food look full and taste good. As for the food safety issue that talks about in later generations, there is no concern in this era. Of course, as a king, Carlo couldn't ignore the safety of the lives of the Spanish. A low-priced food containing both meat and vegetables. I believe it will be popular in Spain, where income is not high. Carlo can also take the opportunity of opening a food factory to set a benchmark for Spanish companies. When all Spanish workers envy the welfare system of royal enterprise employees, it is time to promulgate the Spanish labor law. Although labor laws will win the favor of workers, they are actually against the big capitalists and factory owners. Without full certainty or a large number of worker support, Carlo did not intend to push for the promulgation of the labor law in the early stages. After all, those big capitalists were also supporters of the monarchy. If Carlo fought against those big capitalists before he had mastered his own power, it would be like digging his own grave. The United Food Factory was quietly established. It would take some time before it was officially put into production, and Carlo did not intend to publicize his food factory before it received a good response, not distributed as land to farmers. After all, what is truly valuable about a winery are the planted grapevines, and the value of the land is actually not as great as imagined. Also, because Carlo took the initiative to give up those lands, Primo finally decided to hand over the several wineries left by Queen Isabella to Carlo, at least to ensure that the royal family had some income. This also greatly facilitated Carlo. After all, if you want to start a wine processing plant from scratch, it will not only take a lot of time, but also requires a lot of capital investment. It takes a long time just to cultivate your own grapevines, or to purchase ready-made grape seedlings, which also requires a lot of financial investment. Now that he has several finished wineries and vineyards, Carlo only needs to revamp these wineries and establish his own private wine brand. Carlo plans to split his wine business into two parts. The first wine company is called Royal Winery. In the future, all wine sold will be labeled as Royal Supply and Collection. It will focus on mid to high-end wines, and its target audience will also be wealthy capitalists and aristocrats. The second wine company's name does not contain the word royal. It is called Iberia Estate. The red wine it launches focuses on cost effectiveness, and its target group is ordinary Spaniards who do not have much money. This two-pronged strategy of targeting both the high-end and low-end markets ensures that Carlo's wine industry can capture a share of the Spanish market at an extremely fast pace. Relying on the Spanish market, Carlo can attack or defend, and can also take the opportunity to seize more European wine markets, thereby quickly realizing the wine industry's profit plan. The wine industry has a stronger ability to make money than a newspaper. If we can capture a considerable portion of the Spanish market, we can ensure that when Carlo forms the guards next time, he will not be unable to afford the equipment. First update, please support. Chapter 27 Coronation. Time quickly came to the end of November 1869, which was also the time when the Spanish government prepared the coronation ceremony for King Carlo I. Primo attached great importance to the coronation ceremony and invited European powers including Britain, France, Prussia, Russia, Italy, Austria and old European monarchies such as Portugal, the Netherlands and Belgium. However, different countries have different attitudes towards the coronation ceremony of the King of Spain, and the identities of the envoys they sent are also completely different. The most important ones should be Italy and Portugal. Italy is easy to understand. Carlo was born into the Italian royal family and is the father of King Vittorio Emanuele II of Italy. It is natural that he is valued. On the Portuguese side, Carlo's sister, Princess Maria Pia, married King Louis I of Portugal, so the two countries were related by marriage. Secondly, as the only two countries on the Iberian Peninsula, Spain is a huge threat to Portugal. The Portuguese government wanted to use this ceremony to get a glimpse into the attitude of the new Spanish King Carlo towards Portugal, so that they could make corresponding preparations. Although most European countries were invited to the coronation ceremony, the overall scale of the coronation ceremony was not large. After all, the Spanish government did not invest much money in this ceremony. It's not that Primo didn't attach importance to Carlo's coronation ceremony, but the current Spanish government is supporting the colonial rebellion war while carrying out various reforms. It is indeed difficult to come up with a large amount of funds to hold the coronation ceremony. Carlo didn't care how big this coronation ceremony was. What mattered most was the recognition of the Spanish people, and a bigger ceremony was not a good thing. Through agricultural tax cuts and free literacy education, Carlo still gained a certain reputation in the hearts of the Spaniards. At least the Spaniards supported this coronation ceremony, and there were many Spaniards participating in the event, making it look very lively. Under the expectant gaze of the crowd, a well-trained royal guard protected several carriages with the crest of the Spanish Savoy dynasty and slowly drove towards the parliament. In the carriage, Carlo, dressed in luxurious clothes, was sitting with a serious face. Next to him was his palace butler, Lauren, who was reminding Carlo about the procedures of the coronation ceremony. Your Majesty, please remember to keep smiling. Lauren did not forget to continue reminding Carlo just before Carlo stepped out of the carriage. Carlo nodded, and the moment he stepped out of the carriage, the Spanish people outside watching immediately burst into warm cheers. Of course, the leaders must have been arranged by the government long ago. At such a critical moment, it is impossible not to arrange a few people to incite public sentiment. Carlo smiled and waved to the cheering crowd in a very friendly manner, without any airs of a king. At this time, the Spaniards saw their king clearly, a young and handsome man, with a completely different posture from Queen Isabel. This is what our king should look like. Many Spaniards couldn't help but think of this still support the monarchy. What they most desire is for Spain to give birth to a wise and powerful monarch, who would also care about the plight of the lower class Spaniards. As for Carlo's current actions, although he is still far from being a wise and powerful monarch, Carlo has indeed shown some attitudes different from Queen Isabel in caring about the grassroots people. In fact, we have to admit that making a living by relying on one's looks is useful in any era. Carlo not only has a good appearance, but also has a height of more than 1.8 meters and a strong body. Coupled with his noble status as a king and his rich temperament, he quickly attracted the favor of many Spanish girls. If a media organization were to select the most popular man in Spain, Carlo would definitely be on the list, and it would not be difficult for him to be ranked first. Maintaining his gentle smile, Carlo waved to the crowd and slowly walked into the Parliament building. Some of the guards behind him stayed around the carriage, while others stood guard around the Parliament building. At the entrance of the Parliament, Spanish Prime Minister Primo had been waiting eagerly. After Primo gave Carlo a standard Spanish noble salute, he led Carlo into the Parliament building. The bishop who crowns the monarch seems to determine the legitimacy of the crowned monarch. Therefore, whether for the sake of his own legitimacy in the hearts of the people or to reassure the complex religious forces in Spain, an archbishop with sufficient status and position was needed to crown Carlo. In fact, the best choice was Pope Pius IX. But the Pope had just been driven out of Rome by the Italian government, and his territory had been reduced from the vast papal states to the tiny Vatican. How could he crown Carlo, who was also from the House of Savoy? Although the use of force could threaten Pius IX to come to Madrid to be crowned, it might also backfire and make the Catholic Spaniards dissatisfied. It would be better to let the Spanish Archbishop do the coronation. Anyway, the status of the Archbishop of Toledo in Spain is enough. Your Majesty Carlo, are you willing to dedicate your life to Spain? Archbishop Pedro asked seriously, holding the crown representing the King of Spain. I do. Archbishop Pedro nodded and said solemnly, on behalf of God, I grant you the crown of Spain. May you be kind to your people and loyal to your country. After a long and tedious coronation process, Archbishop Pedro of Toledo finally placed the crown representing the Spanish throne on Carlo's head in front of everyone. Carlo wore the Spanish crown and held the scepter that symbolized the king's power. He looked at the Spanish nobles and parliamentarians with a feeling of pride and high spirits. Greetings, His Majesty. Primo, who was standing by, saw that the time had come and took the lead in paying respect to Carlo. Your Majesty. In unison, Spanish parliamentarians and nobles, including Archbishop Pedro of Toledo, bowed their heads to the new King of Spain. Second update. Please support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28 Royal Military Academy of Madrid. After being crowned, Carlo was in great trouble. If Spain wants to achieve revival, it must have a large number of talents to work hard for the expansion of all industries in Spain. But for Spain, where the illiteracy rate is as high as 70%, what it lacks most at present is talent, especially high quality talent trained in regular universities and colleges. Speaking of which, Spain has a very long history of established universities. The earliest Salamanca University was established in 1218, which has a history of 651 years. In addition, there are many universities that have been established for hundreds of years, which is much better than those European countries that have few universities. But this is also where the problem lies. Although it has so many universities with a long formal history, Spain does not attach as much importance to the cultivation of university talents as major powers such as Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Austria. Previously, the Spanish government would rather waste its annual fiscal budget on things that were of little use than invest in education to encourage more Spaniards to apply to university. Colleges and universities do not receive sufficient funding for education, and the training of high-quality talents in Spain can be said to be a mess. Even in the military, the shortage of talent is affecting Spain at all times. During the reign of Isabella, most of the senior officers in the Spanish army were controlled by the nobles, and it was very difficult for ordinary people to become senior officers in the army. Although the current army was transformed from the Revolutionary Army and has temporarily eliminated this problem, the inability of middle and low-level officers to continue their work is still a huge problem. Carlo also knew that this time point would bring about major changes in the military. The line infantry tactics that dominated Europe during the Napoleonic era had now become a tactic of queuing and shooting. Although the French had a greater overall strength than Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War, the French were destined to have a difficult time fighting because of the large number of French line infantry established by Napoleon III in imitation of his uncle Napoleon. Therefore, Carlo not only wanted to expand the scale of the Royal Military Academy, but also wanted to learn some excellent ideas and systems from the Germans, who would become the world's #1 army in the future, in order to establish a stronger army and officer training system for Spain. Of course, France is not completely weak now, and a Spain that completely imitates Prussia is also a huge threat to the French. To promote the idea of attaching importance to the development of universities, Primo readily agreed and said that the Spanish government would prepare more funding budget for the education sector in the new year. Carlo took the opportunity to acquire ownership of the Royal Military Academy from the government using 3 million pesetas. Primo certainly understood the importance of the military academy, but for Primo at this time, it would be better to hand over the ownership of the military academy to Carlo and put all his energy into the reform of Spain. Although this might allow Carlo to infiltrate the military with influence through officers trained at the military academy, that would be at least several years or even a dozen years later. By then, Primo will be in his 60s, and it will be a question whether he can continue to serve as the Prime Minister of Spain. It is precisely because he is already 55 years old that Primo's only wish is to make Spain rejuvenate at this time, and power struggles are no longer important to Primo. Carlo, who had acquired the ownership of the Royal Military Academy, was in a very good mood at this time, and his attitude towards Primo changed from being hypocritical at the beginning to truly respectful. No matter what the historical evaluation of Primo was, in Carlo's eyes, Primo now was indeed a hero like Garibaldi. It is an honor for Italy to have given birth to Garibaldi, and it is also an honor for Spain to have given birth to Primo. The only difference is that Garibaldi was hostile to the Italian government and king because of his history of supporting the Republic, while Primo gained Carlo's trust and strong support because he supported the monarchy and supported Carlo to become the king of Spain. Carlo, in a good mood, discussed a lot about the future development of Spanish military academies with Primo, who came from an officer's family, and invited Primo to become the honorary vice president of the Spanish Royal Military Academy. Carlo will become the honorary president of the Royal Military Academy, so that all graduates of the military academy can understand who trained them as officers. The Royal Military Academy will be split into two parts, to take into account the different needs of the Spanish Army for officers. The Royal Military Academy is still located in Madrid, and its role is to train excellent junior officers for Spain. The students of the Royal Military Academy are divided into two groups. One is the Spanish civilian students who are willing to apply for the military academy, and the other is the excellent soldiers selected from the Spanish army. The other part of the split will establish a new military academy in Zaragoza, Aragon, with the full name of Royal Military Academy Zaragoza Branch. The purpose of the Royal Military Academy of Zaragoza is to train senior military officers for Spain. It can also be called the cradle of Spanish generals. The two military academies with different goals will continue to train outstanding backbones and grassroots officers for the Spanish army, enabling the Spanish army to maintain excellent combat effectiveness and flexible combat thinking, and become a first-class army in Europe. While training Spanish officers, Carlo could also make these officers more loyal to him. After all, as the King of Spain, Carlo was the nominal commander and leader of the Spanish army. In the future, the first lesson for admission to the Spanish army, Royal Military Academy of Madrid and the Royal Military Academy of Zaragoza will be loyal to the king and the country. With these officers, who have been baptized with loyalty and patriotism, Carlo will be able to exert greater influence on the future Spanish army. If the ideas of loyalty to the monarch and patriotism are incorporated into the education of Spaniards from childhood to adulthood, a perfect closed loop can be achieved, which will increase the loyalty of all Spaniards to the monarchy and Carlo. This is also Carlo's ultimate goal for Spanish education. Only through subtle influence and baptism from childhood to adulthood can the Spaniards accept the monarchy from the bottom of their hearts and be enthusiastic and loyal to Carlo from the bottom of their hearts. Because he had received education at the Royal Military Academy of Turin, Carlo was very familiar with the procedures of the military academy. After investing more than 1 million pesetas in the Royal Military Academy of Madrid, the Royal Military Academy quickly expanded and recruited a large number of students after a simple screening within the Spanish army and civilians. First update, please support. Chapter 29, a troubling reform plan. The Royal Military Academy had started recruiting students was reported by Carlo's Spanish Sun and other newspapers, and became big news around Madrid. Thanks to such publicity, more than 100 people signed up for the military academy in just a few days. Although only more than 60 people were admitted after layers of screening, it was still a big improvement compared to previous military academies. While actively recruiting new students, Carlo also ordered the Royal Military Academy to learn the systems and processes for training officers in Prussia and France, and to reform the military academy. The old Spanish officer training system is not very suitable for the current era. Does learning those outdated line infantry tactics mean that Spanish soldiers will be lined up to be shot? The good news is that the Austro-Prussian War and the Franco-Prussian War that broke out in recent years can be used as subjects of study in Spanish military academies. Prussia, Austria, and France involved in this war are some of the most powerful land forces in the world today. Speaking of the Franco-Prussian War, this war, which was fought a year earlier, was obviously more intense than in history. In history, the Second French Empire lasted less than 2 months before Emperor Napoleon III formally surrendered to the Prussian army. France in this world was not much better. Although it had held out longer, the war situation was firmly controlled by the Prussian army just this one. There was no adequate preparation before the war, and after the war broke out, Napoleon III was still struggling over whether to attack or defend. In addition, the French army does not usually have army and division levels. The armies and divisions hastily organized during the war find it difficult to exert their due coordination and combat effectiveness. Suspense now is when Prussia will end the war, and whether a revolution will break out in France after Napoleon III surrenders. This is the focus of Carlo and the Spanish government. After all, the situation in France can also affect Spain. With Carlo's suggestion and Primo's tacit approval, the Spanish government also came up with a plan for the construction of the university. It is expected that in the next 5 years, Spain will build at least 5 universities, increasing the total number of universities to more than double digits. At the same time, most of these universities will focus on the development of science and engineering majors, and mathematics, physics and chemistry will be the key projects of Spanish universities. Literature, art and other less important majors will be integrated into 2 or 3 universities. After all, Spain does not need so many artistic talents. In order to encourage Spaniards to apply to university, Carlo plans to establish a scholarship system among college students. Doing so will not only allow more children from ordinary families to enter universities, but also allow them to receive the favor of the royal family. It will not only cultivate talents for Spain, but also enhances the reputation of the royal family. It can be said to be a win-win situation. Amid the busyness, 1869 quickly came to an end and 1870 arrived on time. If 1869 was just a test of Primo's reform, 1870 would mark the beginning of Primo's real reform phase. In order to make Spain stronger, Primo came up with a comprehensive reform plan at the end of 1869, which stunned Carlo. In this reform plan, Primo mentioned the necessity of implementing compulsory primary education like Prussia, and declared that he would promote comprehensive literacy education in Spain. Because the goal covers more than 16 million Spaniards, Primo also put the implementation period of comprehensive literacy education within 5 years. Education is just the first step. The second goal of Primo's reform is to effectively raise the income level of the Spanish people. Not to surpass the powerful countries like Britain, France, and Prussia, but to surpass neighboring countries like Portugal, and reach a level not much worse than Italy. How to achieve this goal? Primo proposed 3 plans. First, promote the implementation of Spanish labor laws, to effectively protect the wages and salary payments of Spanish workers and other employees of enterprises. Secondly, by reducing agricultural taxes and increasing food output, the income of the agricultural population can be effectively increased. Primo also proposed that the government set up a grain price regulatory agency to ensure that grain buyers can guarantee farmers' income and control grain prices in the Spanish market. Third, reduce the various miscellaneous taxes left over from Queen Isabel's time and streamline the tax items for the Spanish people. In order to the pressure on the government's finances, taxes on enterprises and factories should be appropriately increased to achieve a balance between the Spanish government's revenue and expenditure. Carlo got a headache just looking at these 2 targets. Although these 2 goals are indeed for reform, they can also effectively increase the income level of Spaniards. But the problem is that doing so will also offend 2 deep-rooted forces in Spain, namely religious forces and the bourgeoisie. Education in Spain is currently largely in the hands of religious forces, namely the Catholic Church in Spain. The reason why there are more than 70% illiterate people is that the schools founded by the church not only have high teaching fees, but also have very high thresholds. Most ordinary people cannot afford to attend church schools. Not to mention the big bourgeoisie. The greed of the capitalists will make them continue to exploit the Spanish people. If Primo wants to protect the income of Spanish workers, he will inevitably offend the big bourgeoisie behind the factory and business owners, the Carlists who are hiding in the dark. Carlo's head is going to explode. A small country like Spain actually has so many troubles. It's no wonder that Emanuele only stayed in Spain for 3 years before he decisively chose to flee to Italy. Prime Minister Primo, is your reform plan a bit radical? Carlo asked with a headache, while holding Primo's plan in the royal palace of Madrid pushes the church and capitalists to the opposite side of us. Do you have the confidence to solve these 2 troubles? Carlo looked at Prime Minister Primo and asked very seriously. This reform would naturally be beneficial to Spain if it could solve the troubles from the church and capital. But if these 2 troubles cannot be solved, the hidden Carlists and the Republicans who oppose the monarchy will take the opportunity to cause trouble, and the situation in Spain may be worse than expected. Second update, please support. Chapter 30. The bigger the storm, the more expensive the fish. Why are things always so bad in Spain? Carlo faces a very difficult choice, which is likely to affect the future fate of Carlo and the Kingdom of Spain. Once Primo's deepening reforms are fully successful and the possible opposition from the church and capitalists is resolved, Spain's comprehensive national strength will flourish, and it may even be possible for it to return to the seat of the great powers. But if this reform aroused opposition from the church and capitalists, and allowed the Republicans and Carlists to take the opportunity to launch a major rebellion, the situation Carlo would face would not be much better than that of Queen Isabel a year and a half ago. Although Carlo still has the ultimate retreat of returning to Italy, the church and capitalists that Carlo has offended may not be willing to let Carlo return to Spain. Moreover, if he returned to Italy in such a miserable state, it would definitely be a heavy blow to Carlo, who had finally obtained the Spanish throne. Should we gamble or not? How should we gamble? This is the most troubling problem for Carlo at present. We may have to face the church, the capitalists, the Carlists and the Republicans. But your majesty, if our reforms are successfully implemented and supported by the people, we will have the support of 16 million Spaniards, which is also the confidence for me to promote reforms. I plan to promote military reforms starting this year, and equip the army with more artillery. Our enemies will never imagine that we will be so determined to implement reforms, and will not hesitate to fight them. As long as the people choose to stand on our side, victory will be ours. Primo laid out his plan in full and tried to win Carlo's support. No matter who Carlo was before becoming king, the moment he was crowned king of Spain, he had a certain prestige and status in Spain. Spain has a large number of peasants, most of whom support the monarchy. If Carlo can support his comprehensive reforms, the success rate of the reforms will undoubtedly be much greater. Of course, Primo also knew how difficult this was reform, and how powerful the enemies he would face were. He was ready to fight alone. Even if it was just for a glimmer of hope that Spain could be revived, he would never give up. How is Minister Serrano doing in Cuba? Carlo did not immediately agree with Primo's plan, but asked a seemingly irrelevant question. Minister Serrano arrived in Cuba 2.5 months ago and immediately launched a campaign to eliminate the Cuban rebel army. If nothing unexpected happens, maybe in a few months we will hear the news of Cuba's recovery, Primo said with a smile. Serrano is indeed one of the most influential figures in the Spanish army at present, and his military talent is worthy of recognition. More importantly, Serrano himself had served as the governor of Cuba a few years ago, and had a better understanding of the situation in Cuba. Historically, Spain had been unable to quell the rebellion in Cuba in the past few years. It was not until the time of Alfonso XII that Spain regained control of Cuba at a great cost. But by then, the Cuban independence forces had already gained momentum, which is why Spain took a full 10 years and cost 700 million pesetas to suppress the Cuban rebellion. This is a full 27 million pounds, which was enough to build 10 main battleships in the era of dreadnoughts, not to mention the era before dreadnoughts. Primo's reforms have not cost so much money so far. If all the money from suppressing the rebellion in Cuba is used to reform Spain, Spain's comprehensive national strength can at least rise a small step. Very good Prime Minister Primo. Carlo was in a good mood when he heard that Cuba could be pacified within a few months. After thinking carefully for a moment, Carlo said to Primo, Prime Minister Primo, I support your reforms. But I also hope that you can be prepared for possible rebellions. We must eliminate any enemy who may stand against the Spanish reforms. Yes, Your Majesty. Please rest assured that the Spanish army is ready to fight for Your Majesty in Spain at any time. We will not be afraid of any enemy who stands against Spain. Before pushing forward comprehensive reforms, I will approve some funds to help the army purchase weapons and artillery. If those Carlists and Republicans want to block Spain's reforms, I will send them to see God and let God reason with them. Hearing that Carlo supported his reforms, Primo stood up instantly and assured Carlo very firmly and seriously, Great Prime Minister Primo, I'm glad that Spain has ministers like you and Serrano. After we wipe out these enemies that block Spain's progress, I will personally reward you and celebrate your success. After getting Primo's assurance, Carlo nodded with satisfaction and painted a big picture for Primo. In this gamble, Carlo chose to stand on Primo's side. The reason was simple. The big bourgeoisie and the Republicans who opposed Primo would never stand on Carlo's side. To put it bluntly, Carlo and Primo are in a state of shared success and shared failure. If Primo failed in his reforms and lost his power and status, it would not be a good thing for Carlo either. After all, Carlo was supported by Primo, and Carlo's initial status also came from Primo's support. How can Spain achieve revival if it does not resolve these enemies that block its path forward? If Carlo just wanted to be a noble who enjoyed life, he could do it in Italy. But if he wanted to realize his ambition and wanted to elevate Spain from a second-rate country in Europe to a first-rate country in Europe or even a great power, he must not be afraid of some domestic opposition. What about the Carlists? Queen Isabel was able to defeat the Carlists twice in a row. Carlo didn't believe that he could lose to the Carlists, a rebel group that had experienced many failures, with the full support of Serrano and Primo. As the old saying goes, the bigger the storm, the more expensive the fish. Take the opportunity to solve the problems of the church and the Carlists that have plagued Spain for many years and make the Spanish people disgusted with the republic. In this way, most of Spain's domestic problems will be solved, and the independence element in various places that have not formed a climate will disappear due to the growing strength of Spain. Thinking of this, Carlo became unusually relaxed. Both the Collas sect and the church were just some clowns who had lost their power. If he didn't even have the courage to defeat these forces, Carlo's ambitions could have been abandoned earlier. First update, please support. Chapter 31 Undercurrent. With Carlo's full support, Primo was full of confidence and worked overtime that night to change his reform plan. Since capitalists and the church were destined to be enemies of the Spanish government, there was no need to consider their opinions during the reform. On January 3, 1870, the Spanish government applied to the Parliament for additional military expenses, which was approved by the Parliament and Carlo. At this time, Primo still held the majority of seats in Parliament, and this process was really just a simple formality. After receiving the additional military funds, Primo immediately sent a diplomatic team abroad to purchase weapons, equipment, and cannons. In Primo's plan, the Krupp cannon, which had experienced the tests of the Austro-Prussian War and the Franco-Prussian War, was the first choice of the Spanish army. However, considering that Prussia was going through a war with France, Primo also had a backup plan, that is, Austria-Hungary or Italy. Although the combat effectiveness of the Italian army is not very good, Italy still has certain research and development capabilities in weapons and equipment. If it is not possible to buy the most advanced cannons from Krupp, buying a batch of substitutes from Italy will barely be enough. On January 11, 1870, the Spanish Sun reported a news about a factory that exploited workers for a long time and withheld their wages. Such reports are very common in today's Spanish society and did not attract the attention of the Spaniards at first. But soon after, a large number of newspapers in Madrid also published similar news, and most of the reports came from the original factory. Soon, the continuous reports attracted the attention of the citizens of Madrid. The workers who have been severely affected have also begun to speak out, demanding that the government ensure that all Spanish workers' salaries are paid on time. After successfully attracting the attention of the Spaniards, on January 15th, a member of the House of Representatives from the Liberal Party submitted a document entitled Draft of the Spanish Labor Law to the Parliament, asking the Parliament to enact relevant legal bills to ensure that workers can receive the salary and treatment they deserve. This document caused a huge uproar and immediately sparked intense discussion in Parliament. Of course, because Primo controlled the majority of seats in Parliament, the draft of the Spanish labor law eventually received the majority of votes in favor. On January 16, 1870, the Spanish government issued a document on the Spanish enterprise management regulations, announcing that all enterprises and factories in Spain would be subject to preliminary control in accordance with the labor law. The decree was cheered by all the workers and contractors around Madrid, which also showed that the government took their opinions seriously. But it is not so good for factory owners and capitalists in Madrid and even in Spain. According to the decree issued by the government, they must pay the wages of workers and laborers on a weekly basis, and those who fail to pay wages will be punished by the Spanish government. This has never happened in Spain before. Although paying full salaries will not cause these companies and factories to lose money, for capitalists, it is definitely better to earn more than less. Isn't this government decree just taking money out of their pockets? Or giving money to those useless workers? The capitalists, whose financial resources were blocked, were fed up and attempted to incite the workers to launch a demonstration, demanding that the government cancel the decree it had just issued. But the workers are not stupid. The government's decree is clearly for their benefit, so how could they stand up against the government that supports them? Madrid. Daniel, what should I do? If I really pay wages once a week as the government said, my factory will go bankrupt, right? The factory owner, Gillen, was sitting in the office with a painful look on his face, next to his friend, Daniel, who was also a factory owner. Daniel, I don't want to pay wages to those damn workers every week. That's my money, my money. Gillen looked at his friend, who usually had a lot of tricks. Don't worry, man. The smile on Daniel's face did not disappear at all, and he looked confident. Think about it, do we just need to pay wages? No, it's all factory owners in Spain. How many people would that be, willing to pay wages for those workers? Just watch. If Our Majesty Carlo forgets who put him on the throne, we don't mind changing the master of Spain. Oh, damn, your way is to rebel. Gillen was stunned for a moment, looking at Daniel in disbelief. Why not? My friend. We can get Isabel off the throne, and we can also get Carlo off the throne. Spain should be ruled by capital, and we are the masters of this country, right? Daniel smiled and nodded, not caring about his friend's surprised eyes. Damn, that's it. When he thought about paying the wages of those workers every week, Gillen's originally rational mind became completely crazy. He nodded and agreed with Daniel, and then said angrily, whoever wants to take my money from my wallet will be my enemy, and God is no exception. Good job, buddy. Daniel's laughter became louder. Just watch, Primo and Carlo will regret it, because they have offended the real master of this country. It's not just Madrid that is in turmoil, but also Catalonia and the Basque country. The Carlists, who have troubled Spain for decades, are hiding in Catalonia, ready to march into Madrid and ascend the Spanish throne at any time. The current ruler of the Carlist party, Carlos VII, who claims to be the King of Spain, smiled at this time, with a look of impatience. Thank God, I finally got the chance. The damn Primo gave up supporting the Bourbons. He and the fake King Carlo should be pushed to the guillotine. Your Majesty, the Catalan army is willing to go to Madrid for you at any time. There is only one King of Spain, and that is King Carlos VII of the Great Bourbon family. The subordinates next to him also flattered him, and said to Carlos VII with a flattering face. Second update, please support. Chapter 30 to capitalist unrest. Very good. Carlos VII nodded with great satisfaction. His eyes were filled with impatience. Now we just have to wait for those dissatisfied factory owners to come out and deal a fatal blow to Primo, the guy who disrespects the Bourbon dynasty. Only the Bourbons are the masters of Spain, and the Savoys should stay in Italy. They are not worthy of Iberia. The situation in Spain is now very clear. Everyone believes that the capitalists who value money above all else will never give up resistance, and will absolutely do whatever it takes to keep their money. This is indeed the case. The counterattack of factory owners and capitalists soon came. On January 19, 1870, the Madrid Workers' Daily reported an article denouncing the government. The report did not mention the purpose of the labor law to guarantee workers' income, but instead condemned the government for blindly requiring factories and enterprises to bear additional expenses without regard to their income. At the end of this report, it was also mentioned that if the government does not cancel such erroneous decrees in time, it is likely that a large number of factories and companies across Spain will go bankrupt, resulting in a large number of workers being unemployed, thus workers' income. The report seems reasonable, but it does not stand up to scrutiny. The extra expenses of factories and enterprises mentioned in the report are actually the wages they should have paid to their workers. If paying workers the wages they deserve will cause factories and businesses to go bankrupt, then what is the point of such factories and businesses existing? Before Carlo could launch a counterattack with his propaganda, the capitalists took their second step. On January 20th, the popular Spanish newspaper Sol was attacked. The attackers first smashed the windows of the newspaper office with stones and other hard objects, then climbed into the office and destroyed some equipment used to print newspapers. Carlo was somewhat annoyed by the capitalists' fearlessness towards the government and the royal power, and he was determined to exclude big capital from the ruling class of Spain. On January 21st, the Spanish government quickly passed the Spanish labor law and announced that it would strictly enforce the provisions of the labor law from that day on, requiring all factories and enterprises in Spain to pay workers' wages on a weekly or monthly basis. Those who defaulted on their wages would be fined 10 times, and in serious cases, the factory or enterprise would be closed down. Once such a decree was announced, it immediately caused an uproar among the capitalist class. The capitalists originally thought that Primo and Carlo would give in, but unexpectedly they chose to firmly oppose capitalism. In order to protect their wallets, the capitalists chose to unite. They wanted to follow the example of Primo and re-promote the revolution in the Kingdom of Spain. On January 22nd, factory owners and business owners around Madrid united and incited some workers and radical Republicans to launch a large-scale demonstration on the streets of Madrid. It has to be admitted that the capitalists' brainwashing of the workers is still effective. After hearing in the newspapers that the factory would go bankrupt due to the extra expenses, some workers began to worry about whether they would lose their jobs because irrational. There is still a small number of workers who choose to stand with the capitalists due to such concerns. After the march broke out, Primo ordered the army to suppress the march, while secretly mobilizing the army to maintain order in Madrid. The purpose of these capitalists is definitely not just the parade, and Primo's attention cannot be completely attracted by these parades. For Primo, who is proficient in military affairs, these small actions of the capitalists cannot be hidden from his eyes. Smaller marching team, carrying a variety of weapons and equipment, marched towards the Madrid palace and parliament. In the eyes of these capitalists who had participated in the Spanish Revolution, the revolution was still very simple. All they had to do was take over the Spanish royal palace and government during the chaos, and the king and government officials would surrender. They don't even need to take the initiative. The palace guards and the Spanish army will voluntarily join them. When these people approached the palace in a mighty manner, they were completely dumbfounded, was not in chaos like the previous revolution, and they were not greeted by surrendering Spanish troops. Looking at the palace guards standing in a battle array in the distance, many people in the riot team swallowed their saliva, as if they had seen the situation clearly. By order of His Majesty, if you give up your weapons and surrender at this time, His Majesty will only pursue those who started the rebellion. If anyone dares to take a step forward, it will be regarded as a rebellion against His Majesty in Spain, and will be executed on the spot. The captain of the palace guard, Giardi, rode a black horse, holding an Italian-made spear in his hand, and shouted to the rebels not far ahead. Don't be fooled by him, no one will forgive us, not even God. Our only choice is to attack the palace and make Spain a true republic, and God will bless us. Seeing that the situation was not good, the leader of the rebel team hurriedly incited the emotions of the crowd to save the morale that was about to collapse. The purpose of the labor law is to protect your interests, and those greedy factory owners will not go bankrupt just because they pay your wages. Wake up, people, look behind you. Those greedy capitalists are the enemies of all Spaniards. I assure you in the name of God, and in the name of the King of Spain, that you will not lose your job, or be held accountable for what happened today. You are blinded by the evil capitalists. But now is not the time to confess to God. We need to defeat all the enemies of Spain, the greedy capitalists, and then talk about other things. Please believe me, for the sake of Spain, please put down your weapons. Seeing that the morale of the rebels was somewhat broken, Carlo would not miss this good opportunity, and shouted to the distance. Hearing Carlo's cry, many of the rebels were moved. There were not many people in the rebel ranks who were willing to work for the capitalists up against the government and the king. As for those radical Republicans, they certainly would not turn against their allies, just because of Carlo's words. But this is a good thing for Carlo. Those who don't lay down their weapons should be sent to see God immediately. After thinking carefully for a moment, many workers were still willing to trust their king. After all, the few things the new king had done since taking office were good for them. Put down their weapons, and involuntarily stood a little further away from the capitalists, lackers and radical Republicans. Very good, people. Those who put down their weapons can come over. I promise to God that you will still be the people of Spain, and this matter has nothing to do with you. Seeing that many people on the opposite side had put down their weapons, Carlo nodded with satisfaction, and said to the crowd on the opposite side with a smile, hurriedly walk towards the palace guards. Some of the capitalists' lackers also gave up their weapons, because they saw no chance of winning, and surrendered to the palace guards disguised as ordinary workers. First update, please support. Chapter 33 Carolist Rebellion. The rebellion instigated by the capitalists ended in such an anticlimactic way. Although the whole process was somewhat unexpected, it seems natural when you think about it carefully. Even such incidents often occur in later generations achieve their goals. But in today's Spain, it is not so easy for capitalists to incite large numbers of workers and peasants. Peasants are the most supportive of autocracy and monarchy, and this is true for peasants in any country, because their demands are very low, and as long as they have enough food to eat, and do not go hungry, they will be satisfied with their existing lives. The agricultural tax reduction policy promulgated by Spain is the best way to win over farmers. For farmers who already support the monarchy, they are of course willing to obey the orders of Carlo and the Spanish government. Compared to farmers, the composition of factory workers is more complex. Workers' demonstrations are an important means for capitalists to achieve their goals, and capitalists will naturally not let go of oppression and brainwashing of workers. This is also the reason why a considerable number of workers are in the ranks of the capitalist rebels, because not everyone can see the domestic situation clearly, and not everyone can ignore the capitalists' sugar-coated bullets and intimidation tactics. However, such large-scale demonstrations and rebellions no longer threaten Carlos and the Spanish government. For Carlos, the biggest threat within Spain is not the capital of Spain, but the independence forces in Catalonia in the Basque country, as well as the Carlos faction that has won the support of Catalan independence activists. Although the march and rebellion were easily resolved, the army under the control of the Spanish government still entrenched around Madrid, waiting for news from Catalonia in the Basque region at any time. For Carlo, he hopes that the Carlists and those regional independence activists, only if they take the initiative to jump out will Carlo have a chance to solve the problem once and for all. Otherwise, if these opposition factions continue to develop quietly in Catalonia in the Basque country, it will only continue to exacerbate the sense of division between the two regions in Spain. This is also the reason why Catalonia and the Basque region have been clamoring for independence in later generations. The Catalan parliament even held an independence referendum and factions declared independence from Spain, based on the voting results. If the Spanish government had not determined that the Catalan regional referendum violated the Spanish constitution and strongly suppressed it, I'm afraid that there would be another country on the world map. The Basque region is no exception. Although it has not reached the point of a direct referendum to declare independence, the independence sentiment in the Basque region is more radical than that in Catalonia, to assassinate the Spanish king several times. If the issue of independence of these two regions cannot be resolved once and for all, the future of Spain is doomed to be unstable, and more opposition parties will oppose the Spanish government by supporting the independence of Catalonia in the Basque region. The good news is that the population of Catalonia in the Basque country is not yet large enough to threaten Spain. Spain has a population of about 16.6 million, of which the majority are Spanish. Catalonia has a population of only about 1.3 million, and the Basque country has a population of just over 300,000. The combined population of the two regions was only 1.6 million, less than 1/10 of the total population of Spain. This was why Carlo was confident that he could solve the independence struggle of the two regions once and for all. The Carlists did not disappoint Carlo in the end. On January 25, 1870, Carlos VII, who considered himself to be a man of great talent and strategy, decided to take the initiative, while the Madrid government was still in chaos. The Carlists published a large amount of news through Barcelona newspapers, saying that Carlos VII was the legitimate king of Spain, and stated that the policies enacted by the current Spanish government would seriously damage Barcelona's economy, and cause Barcelona's economy to regress by at least 20 years. The Carlos faction also greatly exaggerated in the news the harm that the labor law would cause to factories and businesses in Catalonia, even saying that it would cause Spain to lose all its industries and factories, and that all workers in Catalonia would lose their jobs. Under the influence of widespread news, many Catalans believed it to be true and expressed their willingness to join the legitimate government of Carlos VII to resist the rule of the Spanish government. After organizing an army of tens of thousands of people in just a few days, Carlos VII gave a public speech in Barcelona, stating that he would expel King Carlo and resume the rule of the Bourbon dynasty. In the midst of chaos, the new Carlist War officially broke out. Although the participant in the war had changed from Queen Isabel to Carlo, the goal of the Carlists was the same, which was to allow the Carlist ruler Carlos VII to ascend the throne of Spain. When Carlo heard the news of the outbreak of war, he was relieved in Madrid. When Carlo heard that Catalonia had organized an army of tens of thousands of people, he was not at all panicked. Instead, he looked down upon the so-called Carlos VII even more. Why? Although the independence of Catalonia has always been one of Spain's most troublesome issues, at least for now, most Catalans still recognize Spain. And more importantly, the current Prime Minister Primo is a Catalan, and even the last revolution was launched by Prime Minister Primo in Catalonia. There are many Catalan soldiers in the current Spanish army. Under such circumstances, it is impossible for Carlos 7 to form an army of tens of thousands of people. Considering that Catalonia is one of the most economically and industrially developed regions in Spain, it has a large number of workers. Perhaps the Carlists and Catalan independence supporters have formed such a so-called army of tens of thousands of people by coercing these brainwashed and threatened workers. This is why Carlo wanted to laugh. The Carlists kept saying that Primo's reforms had caused Catalan workers to lose their jobs, but weren't they also causing these workers to lose their jobs by what they were doing now? Without counting these workers, the Carlos faction had no more than 10,000 troops. To rely on these 10,000 troops to attack Madrid, did they treat Carlo like Queen Isabel 2 years ago? Second update, please support. Chapter 34 Take over the factory. Although Carlo had no experience in dealing with the Carlists, this did not mean that others in the Spanish government did not. It is worth mentioning that the current Prime Minister Primo was not only born in Catalonia, but also participated in the First Carlist War, so his buffs are maximum doubt. Carlo also did everything he could do now, which was to hand over the full command of the army to Primo and let Primo solve all the troubles. This is a huge difference between having Primo and not having Primo. Amadeo had almost no way to deal with the rebellion of the Carlists because there were no other officials and military leaders in Spain who had a say in him except Serrano. But Carlo was different. With two high-ranking military officials, Primo and Serrano, in charge, Carlo never considered losing this war. In order to ensure that everything was safe, at Carlo's suggestion, the Spanish army imposed martial law on Madrid and focused on protecting important institutions such as the government and parliament. In addition to the 500-man palace guard, Carlo's palace also had an additional 100-man army patrolling around. Considering that the entire Madrid was under martial law, it was basically impossible for the Carlists and other opponents to pose a threat to Carlo and other senior government officials unless they could directly break through Madrid. Before Carlos' 7th Army left Catalonia, the Spanish government received another piece of bad news. A large-scale demonstration broke out in Vittorio, Basque Country, where the demonstrators stormed the Vittorio City Hall and engaged in large-scale clashes with local police. It is clear that the Basques, who share the Catalan fantasy of independence, also have certain ideas. Compared to Catalonia, which supported the Carlists and incited workers, the reasons for the march in the Basque side were more radical, which was to demand independence or autonomy for the entire Basque region. The Basque region here refers to the Basque Country, never in Spain in the northern Basque Country in France. The Basques who occupied these areas were a very fierce people in the Iberian Peninsula and the last people to be conquered in the entire peninsula. Fortunately, the entire Basque population is only about 600,000 and is scattered across the two regions of Basque and Navarre, so the threat is not as great as that of Catalonia. Regarding the demonstrations that broke out in the Basque region, Primo's advice was to use appeasement as the main approach and suppression as a supplement. After all, this ethnic group is still very combative. If it can be absorbed into the large Spanish ethnic group, the combat effectiveness of the Spanish army will also be guaranteed. Controlling the Basque and Navarre regions is also very simple. Just migrate a certain number of Spaniards to these two regions to reduce the proportion of Basques. Since the big bourgeoisie, the Carlists, and the independence activists in Catalonia and the Basque region have all jumped out, naturally no one else will oppose the Spanish government's reforms. While Primo organized the army to prepare for war with the Carlists, he also took the opportunity to vigorously promote reforms around Madrid and strictly enforce labor laws. Those factory owners who took the initiative to instigate marches and rebellions became the targets of Primo and Carlo's liquidation. In just a few days, Madrid police arrested dozens of factory owners and took over hundreds of factories and businesses of all sizes. In order to maintain production in businesses around Madrid and protect jobs for workers in factories and businesses, the government and the royal family took over most of the industry's money. Because Carlo firmly supported Primo during the reform, in return Carlo acquired more than a dozen factories around Madrid at a very small cost. These factories are all high-quality assets, with a value of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of pesetas. There are also large factories like the Madrid steel plant, which has nearly 1,000 workers. Carlo has also rapidly expanded his industry with these factories 10 million pests in funds. Excluding the royal palace, royal residences and estates taken over from Queen Isabel, Carlo would already be among the top 10 richest people in Spain. If all his assets were counted, Carlo could easily become the richest man in Spain. However, Carlo did not care about these false reputations, and even secretly handled some of the royal family's enterprises, to make them seem to have little to do with the royal family. Among these industries, except for wineries which have the word royal in their names, because they want to be high-end, other industries do not have the word royal in their names. It is impossible to tell whether they are royal industries just by looking at the names. As the King of Spain, Carlo must of course firmly enforce the provisions of the labor law. As soon as he took over the more than 10 factories, Carlo had someone calculate the wages owed to all his workers, and basically repaid all the unpaid wages the next day. Without exception, the current situation of these dozen companies was successfully reported in Madrid newspapers, and became a hot topic among people living in the surrounding areas of Madrid. Carlo's purpose in doing this was very simple, which was to set a good example for Spanish capitalists. As king, Carlo firmly abided by Spanish labor laws and even paid off the wages owed by the previous factory owners. What reason do the capitalists have to continue to withhold wages? Do they really think the working class is easy to bully? As public opinion fermented, Carlo successfully gained a certain reputation. Paying back wages is normal, but paying workers back wages for the previous factory owner is not so common. For the workers in Madrid, the biggest difference between Carlo and the capitalists is revealed. Since the beginning of February, residents of Madrid have occasionally mentioned their King Carlo when chatting, and added a heartfelt compliment. Although Carlo only paid the unpaid wages to less than 1,000 workers, it affected nearly 1,000 families. Because they are all around Madrid, after the spread of the word from person to person, at least tens of thousands of people have a better impression of Carlo. And this is the purpose of Carlo's doing this, to gradually improve the Spaniards' favorability towards him, and to make them support and love him from the bottom of their hearts. Once workers have friends who receive the wages they deserve, they will naturally no longer accept deductions from factory owners. The capitalists of this era are always greedy, and it is impossible for them to pay more attention to the opinions of the workers like Carlo did. This will make it difficult for capital and workers to unite again to oppose the monarchy, and the influence of the big capitalist class on Spain will always be limited to a smaller range. As for the future when Spain's economy flourishes due to reforms, Carlo's industry will continue to expand, and even become the largest consortium in Spain. Naturally, there will be no need to worry about the comeback of the capitalist class. As long as Carlo can become the largest capital in Spain, what capital in Spain can compete with Carlo? No matter how powerful capital is, it can never defeat the government, because holding the gun is the final word. First update, please support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Spanish Military Academy opens. While Carlo was still obsessed with the expansion of his royal industry, Prime Minister Primo hurried over and brought Carlo some bad news that might be bad news. That is, the Basque independence element and the Carlists had cooperated. It was inevitable that the separatists and the Carlists would be mixed together, because their individual strength was insignificant compared to that of Spain, and they could not pose a threat to the Spanish government. However, if the Catalan and Basque independence activists join forces with the Carlists to launch a rebellion, it will cause quite a stir in northern Spain. These rebels are spread across Catalonia, the Basque country and Navarre, and the neighboring regions of Aragon and La Rioja will also be affected. But this is also good news for Carlo. Primo and asked the question that concerned him most. The Spanish army will crush all enemies of Spain, whether they are Carlists or Basques. Primo replied calmly. Very good, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm waiting for your good news in the palace. I hope the day of our victory will not be too far away. Hearing Primo's calm answer, Carlo nodded with satisfaction. As the captain of Carlo's palace guard, Gioti naturally heard the news of the rebellion in northern Spain. After a long time together, Gioti had already decided to be loyal to Carlo, and naturally wanted to share Carlo's worries about the rebellion in Spain. Your Majesty, the Red Army currently has more than 10,000 people, and can be quickly recruited into an army. As long as your Majesty needs it, I believe my father is willing to lead the army, to help your Majesty and completely resolve the rebellion in northern Spain. Gioti took the initiative to propose to Carlo. The situation in Spain is not that bad for the time being. Carlo certainly understood Gioti's loyalty, but the civil unrest in Spain has not yet reached the point where outside intervention is needed. Okay, your Majesty. Hearing that Carlo was not willing to ask for the help of the Red Army for the time being, Gioti could only nod helplessly. But you reminded me, Gioti. Carlo smiled and said, since the Carloists have decided to resist my rule, I can never sit and wait for death. It is time to make it clear to all Spaniards and Carolists that the Bourbons are gone, and now is the age of Savoy. I, Carlo of the House of Savoy, am the master of Spain and the true king of Spain. Gioti, I need you to do me a favor. Perhaps only you can do this. Carlo smiled, as if he had thought of something worth mentioning. I'm willing to serve your Majesty. Gioti stepped forward and listened to Carlo's plan. A few days later, a rumor spread in Madrid that their king Carlo would give a speech in a square in the center of Madrid. Although the rumor did not specify the content of the speech, based on what has happened in Spain recently, the speech was most likely intended to stabilize the morale of the Spanish military and the people. Such rumors quickly attracted the attention of a large number of Madrid citizens, including workers who benefited from the implementation of labor laws and farmers who benefited from agricultural tax cuts. It's no wonder that after the two people-friendly laws, the agricultural tax reduction bill and the labor law, Carlo still has a good reputation and support in Madrid. Time soon came to the day of Carlo's speech. The square in the center of Madrid was packed with people, with at least tens of thousands of people coming to the perimeter of the square. Assassins mixed in. At noon, Carlo's carriage slowly came and drove straight to the podium along the reserved passage. Wearing a crown and the king's custom-made robe, Carlo got off the carriage with the help of the guards and walked straight to the podium. A loudspeaker had already been installed on the podium to ensure that Carlo's speech could be heard by most people in the square. As for those who are too far away or have poor hearing, there is nothing we can do. Perhaps they can learn about Carlo's speech from the following newspapers, or get a general idea from the people around them. My people, I'm your King Carlo. It is my honor to be the king of this great nation, Spain, and to witness with you the revival of this great country, Spain. Some people may ask, what qualifications do I have to help Spain achieve its revival? Spain once stood at the top of the world, and the Spanish were once the greatest nation in the world of difficulties. But I want to say that I have confidence in all Spaniards to witness this happen. Spain is great not because Spain once stood at the top of the world. Rather, after experiencing a long period of suffering and lows, the Spaniards still firmly believe that Spain is the greatest nation and still maintain hope for the revival of Spain. The agricultural tax reduction bill and the labor law are just the first step. I will use more laws to promote Spain's progress, protect the interests of all Spaniards from infringement, and enable Spain to industrialize and become strong. We have dealt with the capitalists who exploited the workers, and we are fighting the enemies who want to tear this country apart. My people, please believe me, I will lead Spain to become strong. I will ensure that the interests of all Spaniards are not violated. I will be the enemy of all those who block Spain's progress. I will be proud of the great Spain and the Spaniards, and create a prosperous era that belongs to all Spaniards. My people, although the glory of the past is gone, the future still belongs to Spain and to all Spaniards. Please let us shout together the slogan "Make Spain Great Again," and let Spain achieve great rejuvenation again. Make Spain great again. Only sincere speeches can move people. For Carlo, what he said was what he wanted to do in his heart, and this is what the Spanish people are most willing to hear. Long live Spain. The scene was very lively. Bang, bang, bang. Suddenly, a series of gunshots immediately interrupted the crowd's cheers. People looked up in surprise and saw a puff of white smoke coming out from the place closest to the podium. On the podium, several guards rushed towards Carlo and stood in front of him. The guards under the podium also reacted promptly, quickly locked onto the person who fired the gun in the smoke, and arrested him. "There's an assassin. Your Majesty is injured. Protect your Majesty." The panicked voices of the guards and the shouts of the people below the stage blended into a chaotic mess, and the situation seemed to be getting out of control. Carlo, protected by the guards, stood up again. In front of everyone's surprised eyes, he raised his right hand and shouted, "Nothing can defeat me. Long live Spain." Now, the situation was completely out of control. The crowd in the audience saw that the assassin had been subdued, and the panic in their hearts dissipated a little. Seeing that Carlo seemed to have been shot, but was able to stand up again to encourage the crowd's emotions could no longer be suppressed. "Long live Spain. Long live His Majesty Carlo. Long live Spain. Long live His Majesty Carlo." Hearing the enthusiastic cheers from the audience, Carlo seemed unable to hold on, and fell into the arms of the guard, again. Chapter 36 Proposal to abolish tights. Carlo's assassination instantly became the hottest news in Madrid. It was reported crazily by major newspapers, and passed on by word of mouth by the Spaniards, who were at the scene. Although the camera at the scene did not record the moment Carlo was stabbed, the scene of Carlo raising his arms and shouting at the end was recorded. This unclear black and white photo was also published in the Spanish Sun newspaper that day, and the entire article was given a striking title, "Make Spain Great Again." In its report, the Spanish Sun praised Carlo's courage in the face of danger and his beautiful idea of making Spain great again. Finally, he asked pointedly, if a monarch like His Majesty Carlo cannot shoulder the responsibility of making Spain great again, who is qualified to lead Spain forward? The Carlists accused the government of reforms that affected capitalists and factories, putting a large number of workers at risk of unemployment. But what were they doing? They plunged Spain into the abyss of civil war, facing the great Spanish nation in a situation of fratricide, and tens of thousands of families were about to lose their source of income. Queen Isabel of the Bourbon family has already made the Spanish people miserable. Will Carlos, also from the Bourbon family, let Spain fall into the abyss again? Because of a large number of news reports and word of mouth from tens of thousands of Spaniards at the scene, hundreds of thousands of Madrid citizens quickly learned about the glorious deeds of their monarch, and Carlo also gained a reputation for being fearless in the face of danger. Although Carlo's behavior did seem to be intended to win the hearts of the people, for the Spaniards, this was much better than having a cowardly king. Carlo's raised arms and cheered before fainting also successfully moved the Spaniards at the scene, and through the spread of the Spaniards at the scene, it affected more people of Spain. Don't real Spaniards have the courage to fight for the greatness of Spain? As the protagonist of the assassination, Carlo was sent to a nearby hospital and then transferred to the palace again. The news released by the palace was that Carlo was injured in the assassination, but his life was not in danger, and he was currently recovering in the palace. Primo was still worried about Carlo's safety, but when he rushed to the palace and saw Carlo was safe and sound, he was stunned for a moment, and then he breathed a sigh of "Your Majesty, what happened to you?" Primo looked at Carlo, who was safe and sound, and he breathed a sigh of relief, but also a little confused. Fortunately, the pistol used by the assassin was not powerful, and I had put a steel plate in advance, so it was not a big deal. Carlo did not explain in detail, but just said that he had put a steel plate in advance. After hearing Carlo's explanation, Primo nodded, but still a little scared. "Your Majesty, what happened to you? You are still too impulsive. Next time if you need to give a speech, please communicate with the government in advance. I will arrange for the army to maintain order on the scene and ensure Your Majesty's safety." Primo's concern for Carlo is genuine, because Carlo's safety is also related to the success of Primo's reforms. If anything happens to Carlo, Spain will enter a period of chaos again. At this stage, it is basically impossible for Primo to choose a king again. After all, the Carlists cannot give Primo enough time to choose the next king. Only if Carlo remains on the throne safely, Primo's reforms can proceed smoothly without worrying about any major chaos in Spain. "I know, Prime Minister Primo." Carlo nodded, indicating that he understood. Speaking of which, Carlo also attaches great importance to his own safety. Although he traveled through time, this world is quite also real. As a time traveler, Carlo still has only one life, so he will not ignore his personal safety. Except for the assassin, who was prepared in advance, anyone else who might get close to Carlo was under surveillance and had to make sure they were not carrying guns. The seemingly huge crowd outside would make it impossible for Carlo to get close to him, and the shooting range of small firearms was not that far. In addition, Carlo had a steel plate in his chest in advance, which gave him the confidence to make a public speech in such a situation, facing thousands of Spaniards. Bless me, I'm fine Prime Minister Primo. And after this assassination, I believe that most people will oppose the war launched by the Carlists and be hostile to those who block the reform. Carlo said with a smile, Your Majesty, I plan to abolish the tithe and completely pull all the Spanish farmers to our side. Primo was silent for a moment and told his plan. Tithe? Those guys in the church shouldn't be willing, right? Willing, but what can they do? Primo had a warm smile on his face, but that smile also had a hint of coldness. If they get together with the Carlists, it will be God's blessing. I'm afraid those guys in the church will choose to keep silent. I have coveted the church's land for a long time. Today, religion still has a great influence on European countries, and the power of churches in various countries is innumerable. Spanish farmers have to pay about 1/10 of the tax to the church every year, which is one of the reasons why the per capita income in Spain is relatively low. A large amount of taxes were collected by the church, and the impoverished Spaniards had no choice but to sell their land in exchange for enough food to save their lives. In this process, the church also accumulated a large amount of land and became the largest landowner in Spain after the aristocracy attacks that was specifically used to exploit the peasants must be abolished as soon as possible. Carlo nodded, knowing Primo's plan. After the abolition of the tithe, Spanish farmers were finally completely liberated. At least they can ensure that most of the income from farming goes into their own wallets, and they will be more passionate about agricultural work. It was 1870, and the influence of religion was no longer what it once was. Even the Pope was trapped in the Vatican Palace, so what kind of trouble could the Spanish Church cause? First update, please support. Chapter 37 Palace Guard Expansion. Primo is a man of his words. I had just mentioned the abolition of tithe to Carlo the day before, and the next day I asked members of the same party to submit a proposal to abolish tithe in the House of Representatives. The current House of Representatives is more like a single-handed deliberation by Primo than a General Assembly easily. Before the farmers could react, the Spanish Parliament was completely confused. Pedro, the chief archbishop of the Spanish Parliament and Archbishop of Toledo, had a head full of question marks at this time, and looked at the newspaper in his hand with an expression of disbelief. The newspaper clearly stated that according to the vote of the House of Representatives today, the tithe will be abolished throughout Spain, and it will be implemented immediately. Damn it, the government has no right to cancel our tithes. This is the right given to us by God. Archbishop Pedro felt very painful when he thought that the abolition of the tithe would reduce a large amount of his income every year. He stared at the newspaper angrily and said with gritted teeth, "Bishop, what should we do?" Archbishop Pedro's subordinates came up and asked, "Army in our hands? Can we resist Carlo and Primo's rule over Spain? Now we have to wait and see what happens and think about our plans after the Carlists and Primo decide on the winner." Although Archbishop Pedro feels sorry for the cancelled taxes, it doesn't mean he will lose his mind for the money. The tithes basically exploited the Spanish farmers, who currently wholeheartedly supported the governments of Carlo and Primo. These farmers were already dissatisfied with the church's long-term collection of tithes. If the church jumped out to oppose it, wouldn't it be playing into Primo's trap? Without the tithe, the church could still ensure its income through other means. But if it went against the Spanish government just for the tithe, wouldn't it be the church that would be liquidated in the future when the war was won, acting as if it had nothing to do with it? Carlo and Primo were both a little surprised when they heard the news. Primo had already prepared to deal with the church, but who would have thought that these greedy bishops would be willing to give up a large part of their income? The most excited people in the whole of Spain, of course, are the farmers who lose at least 1/10 of their income every year due to tithes. The abolition of tithes would be a boon to all of Spain, except for the churches which levied tithes directly. Without this harsh and heavy tax, the income of Spanish farmers will see a significant increase, and the government's tax revenue will also increase accordingly. The farmers will have some spare money, which will naturally stimulate the economic growth of Spain. This is also good for the future development of Spanish industry. After all, only when people have money in their hands will they buy industrial products. After the abolition of the tithe, the Spaniards' satisfaction with the government and Carlo also significantly increased. Especially after the assassination, the Spaniards truly began to recognize Carlo and believe in Carlo's grand dream of making Spain great. If Carlo was more of a foreign monarch in the hearts of the Spanish before, then Carlo now has become a real one of theirs. Since we are all one family, it is clear who the outsiders are. Yes, I'm talking about you, the guy who blocked the government from making reforms and affected the income of farmers and workers, the fake King Carlos VII. Although the lower classes are easily influenced by public opinion, it does not mean that the lower classes cannot distinguish between the good and the bad. During Carlo's reign, the Spanish government was carrying out reforms and reducing taxes, and farmers' lives were getting better and better. Although the Carlist faction claimed that the reforms would affect the profits of factories, causing them to go bankrupt and workers to lose their jobs. But isn't the reform in Madrid going well? Not only have we not seen many factories go bankrupt, but have also received their full salaries for the first time. Although the Spaniards did not know the situation in Catalonia, they considered that King Carlos VII, supported by the Carlists, also came from the Bourbon family. There is no need to say much about the reputation of the Bourbon family. This is a devilish family that everyone in Spain is afraid of. And who are the Carlist supporters? Catalans? Basques? Looking at the Orthodox Spaniards living around Madrid, isn't it clear who the scourge of Spain is? Minorities who split the country. It is also because of this that the situation in the chaotic Spain has actually been clear for a long time, and Carlo and Primo are also eager for more forces to stand up and support the Carlists so that they can finally resolve it once and for all. The most regrettable thing at the moment is that the church has not stood up against the government. Otherwise, the large amount of land owned by the church, whether rented to farmers at low prices or awarded to soldiers in the form of land granted for military merit, would once again enhance the government's reputation. After waiting for a few more days and making sure that the church really did not intend to support the Carlists, Primo organized his troops to the north to quell the rebellion with some regret. However, in order to protect the safety of Carlo and Madrid, Primo still left an army of less than 10,000 people, which was more than enough to defend Madrid. Moreover, the people around Madrid are extremely supportive of the government. It is no exaggeration to say that, if the Carlos faction really reaches the vicinity of Madrid, Carlo can organize tens of thousands of militiamen to join the battle with just a wave of his hand. Moreover, Madrid is located in the center of the Spanish settlement. It would be as difficult for the Carlos faction to reach Madrid before the main Spanish army could react as it would be to directly defeat the Spanish army head-on. While Primo went north to quell the rebellion, Carlo was also busy in Madrid. After liquidating the factory owners around Madrid, Carlo had millions more pesetas in his hands. It turns out that these factory owners are not unable to pay their workers' wages. They have enough funds to pay all workers in full wages, but they are unwilling to do so. This was also a good thing for Carlo. With this unexpected wealth, Carlo could also expand his palace guards and form a real royal guard. However, considering the financial situation and the combat effectiveness of the guards after their formation, Carlo only planned to expand the original 500-man palace guard into a guard regiment of about 2,500 people. The Guards regiment consisted of 2 Guards infantry battalions and 1 Guards cavalry battalion, each with approximately 1,000 soldiers. Although there was no separate artillery battalion, Carlo planned to equip each Guards infantry battalion with 2 to 3 cannons to increase the firepower of the entire Guards regiment. After the expansion is completed, the Guards regiment will be responsible for protecting the royal palace in Carlo and will serve as Carlo's direct force under his full command. Second update, please support. Chapter 38. Carlos is full of confidence. Primo is indeed the pillar of Spain. With Primo, the Spanish army would not face the risk of splitting. The United Spanish Army had a strong desire to fight against the Carlist rebels. On February 17, 1870, the Spanish army led by Primo and the Basque rebels met in La Rioja, and the two sides immediately engaged in a fierce exchange of fire. Although the Spanish army still had many shortcomings compared to the Franco-Prussian army, when facing the Basque rebels who were inferior in numbers and equipment, it was like a father beating his son, which made the Spanish army lose its temper. It is true that the Basques could gather thousands of muskets, but they could not even gather double-digit artillery pieces. It would be better to expect the Spanish army to surrender directly than to rely on light infantry tactics to defeat the Spanish army equipped with a large number of artillery. But Spain is not Italy, let alone France, and it does not have that kind of tradition of surrender. After being bombarded by Italian cannons made in Italy, the Basques instantly became obedient. This is also the biggest difference between the regular army and the militia hastily formed by civilians, that is, discipline and morale. As long as some people started to panic and run away, it would be a heavy blow to the Basque army. The panic spread among the Basque army like a plague and soon affected the morale of the entire army. For a makeshift army composed entirely of civilians, if morale is lost, the army will also be disbanded. There is no need to say much about what happened next. After suffering hundreds of casualties, the Basque rebels simply chose to surrender. Although these were not all Basque rebels, it was a heavy blow to Basque independence activists. The Basque army they had worked so hard to build did not even last a day against the Spanish army, and was completely defeated in just an hour and a half. The deployment of the artillery took more than half an hour, and the two armies actually fought for less than an hour. By the time the news that the Basque vanguard had been successfully wiped out by Spain reached the Carlists, it was already a day later, on February 18th. Although Carlos VII was somewhat surprised at the speed of the Basque army's defeat, he did not regret the losses of the Basques. Not only did he not feel regretful, but Carlos VII was even a little excited at this moment, because he thought he had found an opportunity to defeat the Spanish army and an opportunity to perfectly outflank the Spanish army. Why did Carlos VII think so? Place where the Spanish army and the Basques encountered each other was in La Rioja, which is the southern part of the Basque and Navarre regions. At present, the Carlist rebels have successfully moved westward from Catalonia into Aragon, and are located southeast of the main Spanish forces. If the Carlist army could enter the south of La Rioja through Aragon, it would be able to work with the Basque army in the north of La Rioja to implement its plan of encircling the Spanish army. No matter how strong the Spanish army is, as long as they are surrounded on two sides, they are doomed to be trapped by the Carlists. Carlos VII took a map and thought about his plan several times in his mind. He finally felt that this was an opportunity that could not be missed. Several senior military officials in the Catalan army also echoed Carlos VII, which made Carlos VII confident. He felt that the military talent of Primo, which the Catalans boasted about, was actually average. On February 18th, the Carlist rebels marched towards Zaragoza in the Aragon region. Zaragoza is located in the center of the Aragon region. It can be used to encircle the Spanish army in La Rioja, and can also serve as the first line of defense to protect the security of Catalonia. This is also one of the reasons why Carlos VII was so confident, because he felt that his plan was perfect, taking into account both the possibility of siege success and failure, and having corresponding solutions for both. Could it be that Primo could not see the problem that Carlos VII could see? Of course not. In fact, after the main Spanish army led by Primo entered the Castile and Leon region in the south of La Rioja, it immediately split into two groups to deal with the Basque and Catalan rebel forces. Primo's plan was to eliminate the Basques first, and then go straight to Catalonia through Navarre and northern Aragon, to complete the entire counter-insurgency operation. He led the main body of the Spanish army, about 30,000 troops, north to La Rioja, and eventually met the Basque army. The other small-scale force had only about 10,000 people, but they carried dozens of cannons. Their purpose was to organize a line of defense in Aragon before Primo dealt with the Basques, to prevent the Catalan rebels from taking the opportunity to enter Castile, La Mancha from Aragon and Valencia and threaten Madrid, the heart of Spain. For the same reason, Zaragoza is located in the center of Aragon, which makes it very important both in offense and defense. The branch force responsible for defending against the Catalan rebels also chose Zaragoza as the focus of defense and built artillery positions as soon as they arrived in Zaragoza. From this perspective, Carlos VII actually had a certain military vision. But the problem was that Carlos VII had no idea that Primo had divided his troops in advance. He thought that the main Spanish troops were all in the La Raja region. When the Carlos rebels finally arrived in Zaragoza, they were greeted by 10,000 Spanish troops and dozens of artillery pieces that were ready for battle. Carlos rebels also have artillery, but their artillery pieces were antiques from more than a decade or even decades ago, and were far inferior to the advanced artillery pieces recently purchased by the Spanish army in terms of firing speed, range, and accuracy. The artillery fire from both sides seemed to be very different, and the feelings of the soldiers on both sides were even more different. The Spanish army could easily deal with the enemy's artillery bombardment because the enemy was far behind in the number and sophistication of its artillery. But for the Carlos rebels, the feeling was not so wonderful. Even for those Catalan independence activists, watching someone being blown into pieces in front of their eyes was an absolute visual shock. Just one glance is enough to make Catalan separatists think seriously about their position. For those civilians who were brainwashed into joining the rebels, the brutal war scenes were a huge shock to their souls. How could ordinary people have ever seen such a scene? Moreover, it seemed more like they were being bombarded unilaterally. First update, please support. Chapter 39. When disaster strikes, everyone flees. While the Carlist rebels were suffering from the baptism of fire, Primo's side was already clearing out the Basque rebels in the La Raja region. As one of the administrative divisions of Spain, La Raja has the lowest population in the country. However, La Raja is still relatively famous because this area is rich in wine and is a famous throughout wine producing region in Spain. Carlo's Wine Company currently has a total of 5 large grape production vineyards, 2 of which are located in La Raja, which is located in Spain. Shows how famous this region is for wine. Thanks to the sparse population, it is very easy to eliminate the Basque rebels in La Raja. There are only a few population centers in the entire La Raja region, and the whereabouts of the Basque rebels in this area are quite conspicuous. In just a few days, the Basque rebels in La Raja were wiped out. At this time, Primo also received reports from the Zaragoza army. Upon hearing the news that the branch force encountered Catalan rebels in Zaragoza, Primo did not intend to change his battle plan and ordered the army to continue northward to the Basque country and Navarre. Zaragoza has a garrison of about 10,000 troops, and with advanced artillery as fire support, it should be no problem for them to stop Carlos rebels. Primo's mission was to quickly eliminate the rebels in the Basque and Navarre regions, and then go directly around Catalonia from the north of Zaragoza. The rebellion in Catalonia was quelled. The Carlos rebels remaining in Zaragoza would naturally pose no threat. A few dozen kilometers northwest of Logrono, the capital of La Raja, is Vittorio, Gasteiz, an important southern city of the Basque region. This is not only the base camp of the Basques, but also where the main force of the Basque rebels is located. Primo attached great importance to the attack on Vittorio, Gasteiz, and ordered the army to rest in Logrono for a day before marching north to the Basque country. At this time in Vittorio, Gasteiz, the Basque rebels were already in panic. What all the rebel leaders could not have imagined was that the government forces would head north to the Basque country without hesitation instead of pacifying Catalonia first. The Basques' idea was to threaten the government at a time when the Carlist rebels and government forces were fighting each other, and to win autonomy and more local power for the Basques. But now the government army is heading towards the Basque country, which is unexpected by the Basque people. Enrique, is this what you said, that we can take the opportunity to fight for the autonomy of the Basque country? Matisanhutel, the main leader of the Basque rebels, was furious at the moment, staring at the Basque Senator Enrique. It's not my fault, Matis. Senator Enrique spread his hands and said helplessly, who would have thought totally helplessly, that Primo would come directly to us? Logically, shouldn't he go to the Catalan army, which has more troops? Although Mattis and Hertal understood that all this was due to Primo's unconventional behavior, the loss of the Basque army still made him feel very painful. After all, there were only so many Basques. Every loss of a Basque soldier is a heavy blow to the Basques, whose total number is only a few 100,000. Is there any good way to end this war? Damn, when did the government army become so powerful? When did they buy so many artillery pieces? At this time, Mattis and Hatoa's head was full of question marks, and he couldn't figure out why the Spanish army became so powerful in such a short time. There are two ways to end this war. Senator Enrique thought for a moment, and then slowly said, the first way is to surrender directly to Primo. What? Surrender? Mattis and Hatoa looked at Enrique in disbelief and asked, do you think Primo will let us go? He has long wanted to eradicate us and the Catalans. He will never let go of this opportunity. Absolutely not. Then what else can we do? General. Enrique asked back calmly. Tell me about your other plan. Mattis and Hatoa was silent for a moment, and finally he could only remain silent. The gap between the Basque rebels and the Spanish government army was so huge that it was impossible to defeat the Spanish government army alone. There was no hope at all. Another way is to wait for the Catalans to go around from Valencia to Madrid. Enrique said, as long as we can break through Madrid, we will have nothing to fear from the Spanish army we are facing. But it is very difficult to go from Valencia to Madrid. I don't think the current Catalan army can do it, unless God is willing to help them. Where is the Catalan army now? Are they still in Zaragoza? Mattis and Hertal did not have any trust in his partners. They were blocked in Zaragoza by a small force of government troops. This was a big joke. It seems so, General. Enrique shrugged and said helplessly. Damn, these Catalans didn't want to cooperate with us at all. Or their strength can't threaten the government army at all. God bless, let these damn Catalans go to hell. They deceived the Basques. They are using us. The seemingly reliable Catalans are actually not reliable at General. I suggest waiting for another 3 days. If the Catalans cannot break through Zaragoza within 3 days, we will have to surrender to Primo. Senator Enrique stated his proposal. It seems that this is the only way now. Senator Enrique, the news from Catalonia depends on you. If there are any changes, please tell me in time. Mattis and Hertal nodded and could only make a helpless choice. Yes, General. Senator Enrique nodded, looking like he was devoted to the Basques. Later, in the Spanish army, Marshal, the cavalry captured this guy while patrolling outside. He claimed to be a subordinate of Senator Enrique of the Basque region and had something to tell you. I have checked. This guy has no hidden weapons except a letter. Chapter 40. The human heart is unpredictable. When Primo heard his subordinate's report, he just slightly without saying anything. He looked at the man with a playful look until he felt uneasy under Primo's stare. Prime Minister Primo, Senator Enrique ordered me to come and report important information to you. After swallowing and calming himself down a little, the man spoke slowly. Oh, what important information? How could Primo hide the thoughts of these guys? There must be someone with ulterior motives inside the Basque rebels who wanted to cut off ties with them before the Basque rebels were wiped out. Senator Enrique apologizes for the situation in the Basque country. But please believe that Senator Enrique has absolutely no intention of betraying Spain. It was the leader of the rebels, Mattis and Hertal, who used force to threaten the congressman to support him, which led to the Basque rebellion. But Senator Enrique remains loyal to your majesty in Spain. He is willing to provide you, Prime Minister, with all the intelligence on the Basque troops, and is waiting for the arrival of the government's troops to suppress the rebellion. This is a letter written by the congressman himself. Please have a look. Primo looked at the man with a smile, then took the letter and glanced at it. Oh, Senator Enrique is really loyal to the kingdom. Prime Minister Primo chuckled, as if he had forgiven the traitor who betrayed the country. Go back and tell Councillor Enrique that His Majesty had already ordered before I came that ordinary people involved in the Basque and Catalan rebellions should not be punished. Councillor Enrique can take the initiative to report the enemy's situation, and His Majesty will definitely not pursue it. Carlo did say something about pardoning the Basque and Catalan civilians who were part of the rebellion. After all, most of them were brainwashed and forced into the rebel ranks. And Primo was not wrong. What does Carlo's pardon have to do with Primo? Although Primo is also a Catalan, what Primo wants is the strength of the whole of Spain. The best way to deal with rebels like Enrique who are threatening the unification of Spain is to send them to see God. Primo, who was born in the military, would not show the slightest mercy. Since the traitor had the courage to start a rebellion, he should also be prepared for the reckoning after the rebellion was suppressed. Thank God, Prime Minister, I will convey your words to the Senator. I wish you can resolve the rebellion in Catalonia as soon as possible. After receiving the reply that Primo was willing to pardon, Senator Enrique's subordinates were obviously relieved. There was fear and gratitude in his eyes when he looked at Primo, as if he was celebrating that he could continue to show off his power with the distinguished senator. After sending away the troublesome guy, Primo smiled again, called a few generals, and said in a good mood, "Let's go, generals. The Basques are divided, and it is time to send all these rebels to hell." The letter that Enrique sent to Primo contained not only the specific location and size of the Victoria Gasteiz rebels, but also a seemingly detailed list of the rebel leaders. In order to clear himself of suspicion, Enrique took great pains. Of course, this list is not so pure. There are indeed many high-ranking rebels in it, but there are also Enrique's opponents in the competition for the Basque senator and some guys he doesn't like. Enrique's plan was simple, which was to provide this list, to get rid of the charges, and take the opportunity to eliminate dissidents. It was impossible to judge a list that was 80% true and 20% false, unless Primo interrogated everyone on the list and summarized all the information. But as the Prime Minister of Spain, does Primo really have time to screen the list? Even if Primo eventually discovered something wrong with the list, Enrique would have enough to exonerate himself. After all, he was forced to join the Basque. The rebels were wary of him, so it was reasonable to deliberately let him think that more people were among the rebels, right? Unfortunately, Enrique would never have thought that Primo had never chosen to forgive him from the beginning. For a politician who was a military officer, he had already been able to remain cold-blooded towards everyone. Primo breathed a sigh of relief. Although the Basque population is small, the importance of the two cities in the north and south of the Basque country is still very high. Vittorio in the south is the core of the Basque region. If the attack results in a large number of Basque casualties, it will undoubtedly accelerate the alienation between the Basques and Spain. Bilbao in the north is one of the few industrial cities in Spain, and its steel industry is quite important. Destroying the Bilbao factories would be catastrophic to Spain's already fragile industry. Now that Enrique had proactively provided him with information about the deployment and size of the Basque rebels, Primo could also deal with the remaining Basque rebels with ease, and protect the civilians in the cities of Vittoria and Bilbao from the impact of the war as much as possible. As for whether the information about the Basque rebels provided by Enrique was true, Primo was still willing to believe it. After all, Enrique really needed a letter of allegiance to redeem himself from his crime. If even the situation of the Basque rebels was false, wouldn't it mean that Enrique would be in a situation where he couldn't please anyone? The leader of the Basque rebels, Mati, did not know at this time that, after experiencing the betrayal of the Catalans, he would also experience the betrayal of Enrique. After all, the two of them planned the rebellion together. Mati felt that he and Senator Enrique would rise and fall together. If the rebellion fails, neither of them will end up well, and Enrique should have no reason to betray him. All we can say is that Mati underestimated human nature, and even more so the bottom line of congressmen like Enrique when it comes to their own life safety and interests. Within a few days, the Spanish army arrived at the small mountain south of Victoria in a mighty force. This place is not far from Victoria, so it is a good opportunity to take a short rest and prepare to build artillery positions. Primo's plan was to create chaos in Vittoria before the Basques could react, and then force the army into Vittoria to take control of the situation. Because the specific location of the rebels was already known, as long as the Spanish army successfully entered the city of Victoria, these rebels would have nowhere to escape. Things were simple after that. The military took control of Victoria City, arrested the top leaders of the rebels, and announced an amnesty for all Basque civilians. Chapter 41 Rebellion. Although Vittoria is the second largest city in the Basque country, it is ultimately just a small city with a population of less than 100,000. The Spanish army's artillery was a divine punishment for such a city, and since they had already known the location of the Basque rebels, this offensive was easy to launch. After being bombarded by Spanish troops, the Basque rebels quickly lost morale. Some Basque rebels still don't understand how they became rebels, as they were just ordinary factory workers not long ago. Where is Senator Enrique? The government troops have arrived in Victoria. Why is there no news? Matheson Hato, the leader of the Basque rebels, looked flustered in the face of the bombardment of the Spanish army and ordered people to find Senator Enrique. It was originally agreed that Matheson Hato would keep his troops on hold for the time being, and Enrique would use his connections in the Senate to find out the situation of the Spanish army and then decide whether to surrender or continue fighting based on the battle situation in Zaragoza. But now that the Spanish army has reached our doorstep, why is there still no news from Senator Enrique? About 10 minutes later, a soldier came with a panicked look in his eyes and reported, "General, Congressman Enrique is missing." What? Matheson Hato's eyes were 7 parts of shock and 3 parts of panic. He stood up instantly, not caring about the pain of his thigh hitting the table, and said in disbelief, "What did you say? Congressman Enrique is missing?" "Yes, General. We went to Congressman Enrique's residence, and not only was Congressman Enrique missing, but his wife and children were also missing," the soldier who delivered the message answered, after taking 2 breaths. Bang! Matheson Hato sat back on the stool, his eyes filled with 7 parts of despair and 3 parts of resentment. "Damn traitor, everything is over. He destroyed the Basque country and betrayed us." Under the current circumstances, it was clear to Matheson Hato that Senator Enrique was well prepared, and even the arrival of the Spanish army might be the result of Senator Enrique's conspiracy. Now facing the siege of the Spanish army, it is impossible for him to escape. Also because of the previous agreement with Enrique to keep the troops in place, there were more than 3,000 Basque soldiers in the city of Victoria. Once Victoria was occupied by the Spanish army, these 3,000 Basque rebels and he would fall into the hands of the Spanish army. "General, what should we do?" The subordinate looked at Matheson Hato anxiously, and the panic in his eyes was already visible to the naked eye. Matheson Hato was also hesitant. Should he fight the government army to the death, or surrender early and try to win Primo's forgiveness? Although the current situation is clearly more suitable for direct surrender, will Primo forgive him? When he thought about what would happen if he surrendered, Matheson Hato began to become undecided, with confusion and regret in his eyes. He regretted that he was blinded by interests, and agreed to start a rebellion with Enrique to threaten the government. He regretted even more that he trusted Enrique so easily, and did not keep an eye on him, allowing Enrique and his family to escape from Victoria. Hato stood up again, with only despair in his eyes. "The government army seems to know the location of our army. The troops on the periphery surrendered after several rounds of bombardment. Now the government army is rushing towards us." The soldier continued him, "Surrender, surrender. God is not on our side. God has abandoned us." After the 2 soldiers received the order to leave, Matheson Hato's face became calm, and he looked out the door with lifeless eyes, and then closed the door. "Enrique, I hope you go to hell soon. God, please punish the sinners who betrayed the Basques." Bang! Boom! The Basques surrendered, and Primo led his army to easily capture Vittoria, and captured all the rebellious Basque soldiers. After confirming that the leader of the Basque rebels, Matheson Hato, had committed suicide, Primo left 5,000 soldiers to maintain order in Vittoria and look for opportunities to recapture Bilbao in the north, while he led the remaining large force eastward to Zaragoza. Now that the Basques have been dealt with, it's time for a decisive battle with the Catalans. Primo participated in the First Carlist War. He knew that the existence of the Carlists was a scourge and an unstable factor for Spain today. Therefore, Primo decided to simply deal with the Carlist faction in this war and completely eliminate the civil unrest for Spain. As the saying goes, one must first stabilize domestic turmoil before fighting foreign enemies. If Spain cannot even resolve its own minor internal troubles, how can it achieve revival and return to the throne of a European power? On the Zaragoza side, a not so intense offensive and defensive battle was going on. The reason why it was not intense, that the Catalan army did not have much desire to attack, as if they were just doing it perfunctorily, after being married for a long time. Of course, it was also because the Spanish army's artillery fire was so fierce. Faced with the enemy's intensive artillery bombardment, the morale of the Catalans had long since fallen from the peak when they first revolted to the bottom. After being blocked in Zaragoza for such a long time, the Catalan army never got close to Zaragoza. Discussions about this war have never stopped within the Carlists. After being blocked in Zaragoza, Carlos VII knew that things were going to get bad. Originally, the Union of Catalonia and Basque would be able to influence most of northern Spain. But now the Catalan army was blocked in Zaragoza, and the Basques were completely unable to resist the government forces. There will be no chance of victory if the situation continues to develop like this, and the response strategies proposed within the military are becoming more and more unreliable. For example, go south to Valencia, bypass Zaragoza and go directly to Madrid. Are the government troops fools? Even if they can get around Madrid, can they capture the Spanish capital in just a few days? If they fail to capture Madrid in a short period of time, the army of Zaragoza will definitely come back to support them. At that time, facing the attack from the north and south of the Madrid defenders and the army of Zaragoza, they will die even more miserably. Second update, please support. Please read the new book. It is very important to read it. Thank you all the book friends. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 40 to Carlos the Iron Man. At this time, the chances of the Carlist rebels winning had been greatly reduced, and Carlos VII himself actually understood this. What he was struggling with was whether to continue leading the army in a meaningless resistance, or to find a chance to escape and continue hiding in the dark looking for new opportunities. Although it is obviously a better choice to get out as soon as possible, for Carlos VII who has been waiting for the opportunity for a long time, giving up this time may mean that he will never be able to ascend the throne of Spain in his lifetime. The birth of the Carlists has been less than 40 years since Queen Isabel ascended the throne. But in less than 40 years, the Carlists have experienced 4 monarchs: Carlos V, Carlos VI, Juan III and Carlos VII. Carlos VII also understood that the reason why the Carlists had continued to exist and had launched 3 Carlist wars in less than 40 years was because of Queen Isabella's incompetent rule and the corrupt Spanish royal government. The people were increasingly dissatisfied with the Queen's rule, which was the reason why the Carlists remained popular. If she had been replaced by a normal queen, after a long rule of 30 or 40 years, the people would have long recognized the Queen above their heads. Putting aside the ability of the current King Carlo of Spain, he is indeed a master at winning the hearts of the people. In addition, Prime Minister Primo is determined to carry out reforms. If such a pair of monarch and minister succeed in carrying out reforms, will there still be room for the Carlos faction in the future Spain? After all, the reason why the Carlists came into being was because the conservatives did not want to see the Queen take the throne, so they supported Prince Carlos, the male heir outcome, and that was failure. So, should they give the government forces a fight, or flee abroad to enjoy their luxurious life? Carlos VII, who considered himself smart, made his choice quickly and quietly left the Carlist rebels that night. By the time the Catalans discovered something was wrong, it was already noon the next day. The Catalans never imagined until their death that before their army was defeated, the King Carlos VII, whom they supported, had already fled. Carlos VII's escape route was all the way east. After re-entering Catalonia, he fled along the coastline into France. It is worth mentioning that the former Queen Isabella II of Spain also took refuge in France. After all, the Bourbon family came from France. Morale of the Catalan rebels, and it also directly announced that the offensive and defensive battle of Zaragoza had entered its final stage, with both sides attacking and defending in different shapes. By the time Primo's army hurried to Aragon from the Basque region, the Catalan army had almost collapsed. After suffering heavy casualties, the remaining soldiers in the large force chose to surrender. The Catalan troops on the flanks and in the rear fled in all directions, and the chaotic scene was like a market. This also changed Primo's plan from outflanking and annihilating the Catalan army to clearing the remnants of the Aragon region. Although these rebels have successfully fled, the scale of small rebel groups can still have a great impact on the security of the Aragon region. If we don't try our best to clean up these rebels, anything they do will cause the people of Aragon to lose their morale. Fortunately, most of the Catalan rebels had been captured, so the cleanup work, although more troublesome, was not that difficult. In just a few days, Primo led the Spanish army to capture nearly 1,000 escaped Catalan rebels. Most of the remaining few rebels fled into the mountains, and there was no need to pursue them for the time being. Leaving a part of the army to guard the prisoners, Primo took the rest of the large force to Catalonia to carry out the final finishing work. There are still many remnant rebel forces in Catalonia, including some Carolists who did not have time to escape. Primo's plan is to completely eliminate these unstable elements and restore peace to Catalonia. The good news is that there are still many forces involved in the rebellion in Catalonia this time, and Primo can carry out a major cleanup. Just like in the Basque country, most civilians don't actually have much idea about their identity. Whether they are Basques, Catalans or Spanish, they can accept it. As long as farmers can have enough food to eat, and workers can get enough income to support their families, they will not become a destabilizing factor. The real destabilizing factors are the upper echelons of the Basque and Catalan communities, such as the nobility and factory owners, including parliamentarians like Enrique and church figures. Some of them want to gain higher power for themselves through Catalonia's autonomy or independence, while others simply oppose the government's reform policies and want to achieve their own goals through Catalan separatists. Of course, there are also some, such as the Carolists, who wanted to obtain the Spanish throne, but unfortunately they failed in 3 consecutive wars. The final phase of the operation lasted more than a week, during which Primo carefully screened and executed hundreds of Catalan rebels. The largest number of people were Carolists and independents, while there were not many factory owners and church members. As for the vast majority of the remaining rebel members, they were ordinary farmers and workers before, so they were naturally let go by Primo. After all, too many people have died in this rebellion. On the premise of holding all the rebel leaders accountable, it is also necessary to maintain local stability by forgiving ordinary rebel members. In order to reassure the people in the Basque and Catalonia regions, Primo also posted a special notice about the exemption of ordinary people. But at the same time, Primo also publicly executed high-ranking rebels, which made ordinary people understand that rebellion also has a price, and when launching a rebellion, they need to carefully consider whether they can afford the cost of failure. First update, please read on. Chapter 43 Another coup in France. Mid-March 1870, when Primo finished the finishing work and led his army back to Madrid. This civil war in Spain did not attract much attention from the great powers, because in the north of Spain, the war between the Kingdom of Prussia and the French Empire was already coming to an end. Carlo was also following the war between the two major European powers. French Emperor Napoleon III taught Carlo a truth with his own and France's future destiny, that is, it is best not to micromanage the war on the front line, but to trust the generals and soldiers under his command. Before the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War, if one had told any senior European official that Prussia would win the war with France, they would probably have been met with contempt and ridicule. Why? Because France was still enjoying the afterglow of the Napoleonic Empire. The empire created by Napoleon III was still the most powerful army overlord in the entire European continent. Judging from the strength on paper, the Prussian army should have no reason to defeat the French army. But the powerful Second French Empire failed so simply, defeated by the large number of line infantry that admired Napoleon's afterglow too much, defeated by the constant micromanagement of the quite confident Napoleon III, and also defeated by insufficient preparations in the early stage of the war. The high-level commanders did not have too thorough plans and responses to the war. On March 21, 1870, the news that shocked the world was born. Napoleon, who was feared throughout Europe, formally announced his surrender to the Prussian army. The once powerful French Empire was defeated, which was something that no European country had expected. The defeat of France will inevitably lead to a series of changes in the policies of European countries, and the importance attached to Prussia will be infinitely increased. But what no one expected was that before their foreign policy was changed, the French once again created big news. On March 23, 1870, 3 days after Napoleon III announced his surrender, the Prussian army had just captured Napoleon III and was planning to use Napoleon III to make demands on the French government for a large amount of compensation and land. But unexpectedly, the French launched a coup and established a republican government, and Napoleon III lost his effectiveness in just a few days. In other words, Europeans are not very familiar with the history of the Ming dynasty, otherwise Bismarck would have exclaimed, "Isn't this the script of the Emperor of the Gate?" Of course, compared to the idea of the supremacy of imperial power in the East, the power of kings and emperors in Europe is not that great. What supported Napoleon III to become emperor was the massive military power in his hands, an advantage that no longer existed after the defeat of the French army. If Napoleon III were allowed to become the emperor at this time, the French who launched the coup would turn their guns on him without hesitation. What is an emperor? Sorry, France is now in the era of the National Defense Government headed by General Louis-Jules Trochu. There was no other way. The war with France had to continue. What Bismarck wanted was definitely not the surrender of a discredited Napoleon III, but the surrender of the entire French government, as well as a large amount of reparations and land, to declare that the entire German region was free from French control. Only by defeating France civilly and forcing the French to sign an agreement on compensation and cession of territory could the southern German states understand that the German region could only be controlled by the Germans, that Prussia was the chosen one of the German region and was destined to unify the whole of Germany. But the French also have their own pride. The French do not want to see the once powerful France being bullied by Prussia, a country that France looked down upon decades ago. The French demanded that the new National Defense Government strengthen the defense of Paris and reorganize the National Defense Army to fight a decisive battle with the Prussians in Paris. But for the current French National Defense Government, the will of the French people has become a tight ring on their heads, forcing them to reach a peace agreement with Germany more quickly. As we all know, launching revolutions and coups is a tradition of the French to others again. Actively preparing for war can indeed conform to public opinion, but we must also take into account the current situation in France. The previous war had already consumed a large amount of funds, and coupled with the repeated defeats of the French troops on the front line, Napoleon III surrendered with tens of thousands of French troops. If we now want to rely on the newly formed army to fight the Prussian army, wouldn't that be repeating the mistakes of Napoleon III? Rather than being an external enemy like Prussia, the government of national defense was more worried about the intense emotions of the French people in Paris and a growing revolutionary fever. Faced with the choice of preserving France's territory and dignity and maintaining its own power, the French defense government chose the latter without any hesitation. While they were calming the people and strengthening the defense of Paris, they were also conducting secret negotiations with Bismarck, the commander of the German army. The diplomatic representative sent by the French government was named Faber. When Faber secretly found Bismarck to request peace talks, Bismarck was planning an attack on Paris in his army. As soon as he met Bismarck, Faber talked incessantly about the French National Defense Government's condemnation and protest against Napoleon III, and thanked Prussia for helping France overthrow the rule of Napoleon III. Bismarck had no expression on his face as he waited for Faber's next point. Faber also knew that he could not impress Bismarck with simple words, so he immediately mentioned the sincerity of the French National Defense Government. Dear Minister Bismarck, on behalf of our National Defense Government, I convey to you the opinions of all French people. We acknowledge France's defeat in this war and are willing to pay full compensation to mend our relations with Prussia. But at the same time, my government will never accept the cession of any land, and neither will all French people. If you wish, we can always sign a peace treaty to end this war that should never have happened. What Faber said, or the opinion of the current French National Defense Government, is that the compensation should be paid in full, but land cession will never be accepted. Ceding land is a huge humiliation for any country, and will also arouse domestic public indignation and a large amount of opposition. not to mention France, which was considered the European hegemon a year ago. Even for some backward and corrupt countries, ceding land would cause public resentment. If the French defense government wants to maintain its power, it must not give up on land. But this was somewhat funny to Bismarck. The financial concessions and territorial firmness expressed by the French government might impress others, but they would definitely not impress Bismarck. For the Iron Chancellor Bismarck, if a country expressed a tough attitude in front of him, the best way was to fight back with an even tougher attitude. Second update. Please read on. Chapter 44 Paris citizens assist. Bismarck walked slowly up to Faber, his face showing no emotion, and said word by word, "This war was started by France, and the responsibility should be borne by the French government. Prussia paid too much for this war, and money alone could not make up for the pain in the hearts of the Prussian army and people. If your government is unwilling to cede territory and pay compensation, that's fine. We can go to Paris to negotiate further." Faber knew the hidden threat in Bismarck's words. To put it nicely, he would go to Paris for further negotiations. To put it bluntly, if the French government did not agree to cede territory, the Prussian army would continue to attack Paris. Once the French capital fell, it would no longer be easy for the French government to refuse to cede territory and pay compensation. Seeing that Bismarck would not be bullied, Faber had no choice but to change his strategy. Prime Minister Bismarck, ceding land will make tens of millions of French people unhappy and will cause endless troubles to the French government. Please, for the sake of tens of millions of French people, do not let us cede land. We are willing to meet any demands of your government in terms of reparations, and do our best to repay all reparations. Faber's strategy of using soft tactics did not work, but Bismarck remained unmoved, and said with a smile, "Mr. Faber, what do the French have to do with me? Please don't forget that I'm the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Prussia and I only care about what the Prussians think. If your country is still unwilling to cede land, I will be happy to go to Paris and negotiate with your government in person." Seeing that all his strategies were ineffective against Bismarck, Faber could only resort to his last trick, which was to delay time. He handed Bismarck a thick French document and said sincerely, "Please take a look at these documents first, and then give us 15 days to consider. We will give you a reply in 15 days. Please believe in our sincerity." Bismarck shook his head, took a document written in German, handed it to Faber, and said, "Don't bother, Mr. Faber. This is a document and our answer." The surprise and worry in Faber's eyes could no longer be hidden. Submitting documents in German is not common in the diplomatic practices of European countries. Because France has long been the hegemon of Europe, diplomatic exchanges between European countries are basically conducted in French. This is also the reason why French became the common language among European aristocrats. Aristocrats would learn French, including Carlo, who had learned French before, so there was no problem with daily communication. Bismarck's breaking of previous conventions was also a reminder to Faber that France's days as the overlord of continental Europe were gone forever. After Prussia defeated France, it naturally became the new overlord of the European continent, so it is not surprising that diplomatic documents were written in German. This puzzled Faber. Although he was a diplomat sent by the French government, he was not very professional in diplomacy. More importantly, because all previous diplomatic exchanges were conducted in French, Faber's German was actually not that good. Faced with such a document written entirely in German, a question emerged in Faber's mind. What is this about? Seeing Faber's puzzled expression, Bismarck lost all patience and waved his hand, saying, "Okay, Mr. Faber, go back. I hope you can take this document back to Paris." Faber had no choice but to return to Paris in disgrace. On Bismarck's side, after ending this meaningless peace negotiation, he ordered the Prussian army to continue to Paris and force the French government to sign a peace treaty that satisfied Bismarck. Because the army led by Napoleon III had surrendered, Bismarck's path to Paris was unobstructed. However, the French government in Paris still had hope at this time, because they did not believe that the Prussian army would be so cruel as to directly bombard Paris. You know, Paris is one of the largest cities in Europe, with a large number of French and other foreign tourists. As the capital of France, Paris also has diplomatic ambassadors from many European countries. unless Prussia is willing to take the risk of offending all European countries, they do not have the courage to bombard Paris. It was with this mentality that after the Prussian army approached Paris, the French government not only did not give in, but instead sent a letter to Bismarck. You have any plans? Please let us know in advance, so that we can notify the ambassadors of various countries to evacuate. This was a blatant reminder to Bismarck to consider the opinions of other European countries. It was true that Prussia could bombard Paris, but was it something that other countries wanted to see? That Prussia could easily bully France, the former hegemon of Europe? Although this is common sense, French politicians clearly underestimated Bismarck's courage. Bismarck also immediately wrote back to the French government, in which he wrote, "What you asked is the highest military secret of Prussia, and I have no way to tell you for the time being. If you need to evacuate foreign ambassadors in advance, you can do it now." If it was just a reply to the French government, then this would be another meaningless threat. For the experienced Bismarck, he would naturally not miss the delicate situation in Paris. This letter was not only sent directly to the French government, but was also made public by Bismarck and sent to many newspapers in Paris. This immediately caused heated discussion among the citizens of Paris. It turns out that the new National Defense government has been negotiating with Prussia for so many days and has only come up with the result of bombarding Paris. Doesn't this betray the former glory of France? The citizens of Paris once again launched an uprising, intending to overthrow the capitalist-controlled National Defense government and establish a French angry government that had the courage to resist the Germans to the lack of support. It was quickly suppressed by the National Defense government. But at the same time, the fierce opposition from the people in Paris also caused panic among the French defense government. The French government knew that the peace talks could not be delayed any longer, and that a result must be reached as soon as possible so that it could free up its hands to stabilize the situation in Paris. On April 5, 1870, the French National Defense Government signed a treaty on surrender, jointly signed a treaty on an armistice, and France finally ushered in a brief peace. Perhaps the people of Paris did not expect that their pressure on the government would make the French government even more accommodating to Prussia. The armistice agreement, which was originally going to take a long time to negotiate, was signed, and the French government also forgot the bottom line of not ceding territory that it had maintained a few days ago, the artillery and ammunition of the Paris fortress, to the Prussian army, and pay a compensation of 200 million francs. Bismarck also added an additional clause that the German army could enter Paris in triumph and pass through the Arc de Triomphe in the center of Paris, pass through, and the Arc de Triomphe was born. However, because the construction plan of the Arc de Triomphe in the middle was overturned by Napoleon, the Arc de Triomphe was not completed until 1836. Why did Bismarck want the Prussian army to pass through the Arc de Triomphe in triumph? Because decades ago, during Napoleon's glorious campaign to conquer Europe, he had defeated Prussia many times. This was also the reason why France looked down on Prussia before the war. As the Prime Minister of Prussia, Bismarck naturally wanted to wash away the shame of Prussia in this way, and at the same time return the same shame to France and the French people. First update, please support. Chapter 45, winning over the nobility. Carlo didn't have time to appreciate the bustle of Paris. For Carlo, the most important industry in the future layout has not yet been established, and this must be put on the agenda. What industry? Of course, it is the banks related to finance. Since the Industrial Revolution, industry and finance have replaced agriculture and become the two most profitable industries. Carlo currently has more than 10 factories. Now is the time to start his own financial institution and expand his money-making channels. Carlo had been preparing for a long time to establish his own banks can make money only when they have money, and then achieve a virtuous cycle of money-making money and continuously generating income. Carlo has also gained some good impression in the hearts of the people of Madrid through several tax reduction policies, but this good impression alone is not enough. In order to reassure the people about the newly established bank, Carlo planned to win over the Spanish nobles to join his bank. As the three most powerful classes in Spain, aristocrats, landowners and the church, the Spanish nobility were quite luxurious. Previously, Carlo had not received strong support from the entire aristocracy because he was an outsider. Some of the nobles even chose to support the Carlos faction, and they were still devoted to the Bourbon family that had dominated Spain for hundreds of years. After defeating the Carlists, there was no longer any obstacle for Carlo to exert his influence over the aristocracy. He wanted to bring the aristocracy together to establish a bank, because the aristocracy had more funds, which could help Carlo's bank gain greater advantages in the early stages and expand more quickly. Secondly, it is to make money together with the aristocracy, so that the aristocracy can know clearly who the king above their heads is. I believe that most of the nobles are relatively wise. After all, Carlo is already the king recognized by the Spanish constitution and the people, and this is a fact that they cannot change at all. Only by gaining influence and voice among the Spanish aristocracy could Carlo ensure that his position and power as king would not be shaken. The Spanish monarchy has a long history, and the power of the royalists cannot be ignored. After gaining the full support of the royalists, the Republicans, who posed a major threat to the royal power, were no longer so fatal. For the nobles, they certainly also need a capable monarch to lead them forward. The status of the nobles comes from the king, which is why Carlo is confident that he can gain the support of the nobles. After all, if the king, the biggest noble leader, is gone, how can the remaining dukes and marquesas exist? Carlo's first target was Toledo, south of Madrid. In Toledo, there was a nobleman who was very influential in the Spanish aristocracy, the Duke of Alba wealth. As a foreign king, Carlo's current property is pitifully small. Apart from some castles left by the Bourbon family, Carlo does not have a large amount of land, which is the symbol of aristocracy. It is said that the king is the largest landowner in a country, but here in Spain, Carlo's land holdings are not even as large as some of the Spanish dukes. The current Duke of Alba, Jacobo Louis Fitz, James Stuart, Ventimiglia, was born in 1835. It is worth mentioning that his wife and Napoleon III's wife are sisters, and he and Napoleon III are brothers-in-law. To Carlo's relief, Duke Jacopo of Alba treated him with great respect, and also expressed his intention to please Carlo in his words and deeds. When Carlo proposed to jointly establish a bank with the nobles, Jacopo, Duke of Alba, immediately vowed that he would invest in Carlo's bank and become its first depositor. Although the conversation with Duke Jacopo lasted only more than an hour, Carlo and Duke Jacopo quickly reached a consensus on the establishment of the bank and improved their relationship. Duke Jacopo also invited Carlo to attend his private party, and his intention to surrender was self-evident. Of course, Carlo likely repeatedly. Through the introduction of Jacopo, Duke of Alba, Carlo could easily gather this group of nobles who were familiar with the Duke of Alba and exert his influence on the noble class, can truly enter the era of Savoy. Interestingly, both Queen Isabella and Charles VII of the Carolist party chose to flee north to France after their defeat. But France has now entered the Republican era, and these nobles who fled to France for refuge might also be affected. At least the life of refugees in France is not so comfortable. Before, they were protected by French Emperor Napoleon III, but now the French nobles are in trouble, and the status of these refugees from the Spanish Bourbon family in France will be even more embarrassing. It turns out that most of these Spanish nobles are not fools. After Primo put down the Carolist rebellion, these nobles had already expressed their intention to contact Carlo and pledge allegiance to him. All the nobles that Carlo met agreed to his request to jointly establish a bank, and they all expressed their willingness to become depositors of the bank and save part of the funds. Even Primo finally agreed to join United Bank after Carlo's repeated invitations, which made Carlo full of confidence in the development of the bank. Of course, Duke Serrano, who was suppressing the rebellion in Cuba, was also included in Carlo's invitation plan. However, Serrano would have to wait until he returned to Madrid to join the bank, so there was no rush for the time being. With the support of the nobles, the preparations for the bank went very smoothly. On April 9, 1870, the first Royal United Bank in Madrid officially opened, attracting a lot of attention. On the first day of opening, a large number of nobles came to the Royal United Bank to deposit money. This grand occasion also aroused heated discussions among the people. The Royal United Bank became the most popular bank in Madrid in a short period of time. On the first day of the bank's establishment, it welcomed hundreds of depositors, most of whom were nobles who wanted to show their support for Carlo. Especially for those dukes, the deposit unit was calculated in 100,000 pesetas, and some even had deposits directly exceeded 1 million pesetas. Although 1 million pesetas is worth less than £40,000, this amount of money is definitely a large amount of savings for any bank in Spain. Second update, please support. Chapter 46 Jacob's Private Dinner. Congratulations, Your Majesty. The construction of the Royal United Bank is very successful. Perhaps this year Spain will have a super large bank with over 1 million depositors. Duke Jacobo of Alba complimented Carlo with a smile on his face. Bank had 684 depositors that day, with total deposits exceeding 18 million pesetas, and an average deposit of 26,870 pesetas per person. Of course, such data is actually very inflated. Among the 684 people who deposited money, most were nobles who had received the news. Among them, there were 3 people who had deposits of more than 1 million, namely, Jacobo, Duke of Alba, Fernando, Duke of Albuquerque, and Carlo himself. There are actually only 1 or 200 real civilian savers, which is why per capita deposits are ultimately raised to a very high level. This also shows how huge the assets of the Spanish nobles are. The deposits they took out, to show their sincerity, were just a drop in the bucket, compared to their assets. But for Carlo, it was already a very important starting capital. 18 million pesetas was already most of the assets Carlo brought to Spain, and this was only the total deposits received by the Royal United Bank on the first day of its opening. If the Royal United Bank can gain the trust of the people and attract a large number of Spanish people to deposit money there, Carlo will have a steady stream of available funds. With sufficient funds, Carlo can continue to plan the expansion of the industrial and financial sectors, and make more money. It is still easy to make money in this era, especially as a king. With the huge capital brought by the Royal United Bank, Carlo can easily monopolize an industry, maximize the benefits of an industry, and quickly fill his pockets. Your Majesty, please don't miss the banquet tomorrow night. There will be a large number of nobles participating. It's time for Your Majesty to meet these guys, Jacobo said with a smile. Since Prima put down the Carolist rebellion, Jacopo no longer looked down on Carlo, because he knew that from then on Carlo's throne would become very stable, and Carlo's fate would be tied to the Spanish nobles. When they looked down on Carlo as the king at this time, they were actually looking down on themselves as the king's subordinates. The nobles have a superior status entirely, because of the people's obedience and support for the monarchy. If the people no longer support the king, and overthrow the monarchy, the nobles' sense of superiority will no longer exist. Although Carlo is an outsider, isn't Bourbon also an outsider? The Savoy dynasty still controls the throne of Italy, but the Bourbon dynasty currently controls no country. Of course. Carlo smiled and nodded. I have no reason not to go to the banquet that you personally invited, Jacopo, Carlo said with a smile. Jacob nodded, said goodbye to Carlo's palace, and went back to prepare for the banquet that had been planned for a long time. This banquet was hosted by Jacobo in his personal capacity. Its main purpose was to show his loyalty to Carlo, and at the same time, to help Carlo completely conquer the Spanish nobles at the banquet. After all, Carlo is an outsider. If he wants to gain the recognition of the entire aristocratic class, the support of old Spanish aristocrats like Duke Jacob is very important. Jacobo naturally understood that helping someone in need was far more important than adding icing on the cake. If he waited until Carlo had conquered some of the nobles before joining him, it would not be so easy to become Carlo's confidant. You know, although the nobles have a superior status, their families will not last forever. If you want to ensure the longevity of your family, the first thing is to gain the support and trust of the king, and the second is to enter into political marriages with other nobles, and cooperate with each other. At this banquet, Jacobo also had some selfish motives of his own. His daughter Anna was born in 1855, and will soon be 16 years old. Carlo was born in June 1851, and has not yet turned 19, so the age difference between the two is not too big. If Anna and Carlo had the chance to fall in love with each other at the banquet, perhaps the de Toledo family's status in Spain would have been further enhanced. Even if she could not become the Queen of Spain, the Toledo family would not suffer any loss if Carlo chose her to be one of his mistresses. After all, it was very normal for European monarchs to have a mistress, and the chaotic life among the nobles was unimaginable for ordinary people. The day of the banquet soon arrived. The banquet was held in the castle of Duke Jacob, which was located on the outskirts of Madrid, not south far from Toledo. Jacobo attached great importance to this banquet and invited a large number of nobles from Spain to participate. However, due to the limitation of the venue, the nobles who could participate in this banquet had to be earls at least. Viscounts and barons were basically not eligible to participate except for those with high prestige or status. There was nothing that could be done about it. After all, there were already hundreds of dukes, marquesses, and earls in Spain. Although due to the distance, less than 100 people could attend the banquet. But if we count the female companions and family members of the nobles, there is no problem for hundreds of people to attend the banquet. This is almost the limit of a private banquet. If there are more people, the banquet scene will be quite chaotic, and the safety of the nobles attending the banquet cannot be guaranteed. Especially since Carlo would be participating, safety work had to be taken seriously. If the banquet ended unhappily due to some unexpected events, then Jacobo's preparations would be in vain. Carlo was also looking forward to this banquet. Although Carlo had met many Spanish nobles during the last coronation ceremony, the nobles at that time were not so sincere towards Carlo. Now with the support of Jacobo and Carlo's throne already quite stable, the nobles have no choice but to obey Carlo's rule. Tonight's banquet is the beginning of Carlo completely gaining the loyalty of the nobility, becoming the true king of Spain, and being able to exert his influence on the government through the nobility. After tonight, Carlo will have a large number of trustworthy subordinates. At least in terms of maintaining the monarchy, these nobles will definitely stand with Carlo. Carlo will not be alone when facing the Republicans. These nobles are Carlo's best helpers and the most opposed group to the Republic in the whole of Spain besides Carlo. In order to gain Carlo's trust and to ensure the smooth progress of the banquet without any accidents, Duke Jacobo specifically requested Carlo to send a part of the royal guards to help maintain order at the banquet when organizing the banquet. This also includes a simple body search of those attending the banquet to ensure that no one is carrying a weapon. This was also discussed in advance with the nobles attending the banquet. After all, Carlo didn't want anyone to sneak into the banquet with weapons and give him a fatal blow when he was most relaxed. Your life still has to be in your own hands, and you can't trust anyone when necessary. It's not that Carlo is unwilling to trust others, but mainly because there have been countless assassinations of kings across Europe, and Carlo is not a fool. Even if Jacobo could be trusted, could every noble attending the banquet be trusted? Even if all the nobles were okay, could they ensure that there would be no rebels among the female companions they brought? Screening one by one is a waste of time and inefficient. The best way is to make sure that no one carries a weapon and turn the castle where the banquet is held into a weapon-free safe zone. At about 6 o'clock in the evening, Carlo took a carriage and slowly drove towards Jacob's castle under the escort of the guards. This carriage was also specially made, and there was even a steel plate at the window that could be pulled down to prevent bullets from penetrating. Because the carriage was inlaid with heavy steel plates, the entire carriage was pulled by 4 horses to ensure its speed. In order to ensure Carlo's safety, 2 identical carriages drove out of the palace at the same time, ensuring that even if there were assassins, they would not be able to tell which carriage Carlo was sitting in a short time. At around 7 o'clock in the evening, Carlo's carriage finally arrived at Jacob's castle. Outside the castle, a large group of nobles had been waiting for a long time. The positions of the nobles also reflected their status. The dukes like Jacobo stood in the front, followed by the marquesses, and finally the earls and a small number of viscounts and barons. The nobles were accompanied by their female companions and family members. Hundreds of people stood outside the castle to welcome Carlo's arrival. The king, watching Carlo get off with the help of the maid, all the nobles gave Carlo a standard noble salute, welcoming the king with the highest etiquette. "Good evening, my nobles." Carlo also smiled and waved, showing his close attitude towards these nobles. Jacobo stepped forward quickly and said very respectfully, "Everything is ready, Your Majesty. The banquet can start at any time after your order." "Good job, Jacobo. Okay, guys, let's go in and enjoy the carriage banquet," Carlo said with a smile, without any airs of a king. Surrounded by a large group of nobles, Carlo slowly walked into the castle and began to experience the private aristocratic banquet with unique Spanish characteristics. The first update of 3000 words. Please support me. Please read me. Today's update of 6000 words. Chapter 47 Royal Council. Carlo experienced the unique Spanish aristocratic banquets of this era. Luxury. So fucking luxurious. Carlo couldn't help but sigh. Although the scale of this castle is much smaller than Carlo's palace, the decoration inside the castle is in no way inferior to that of the palace, showing the luxury and wealth of the Spanish aristocracy since the colonial era of pesetas. Because Carlo is Italian, when planning the banquet, Jacobo specially invited several skilled Italian chefs to prepare Italian food specifically for Carlo. The nobles were very reserved at first, but when Carlo showed a very friendly attitude, they began to relax. Cheers to the king. Everyone raised their glasses to signal Carlo. Even if some had other thoughts, they did not dare not raise their glasses in such an occasion. Whether you objected secretly or not was a private matter. But if you didn't raise your glass on such an occasion, you would probably be ostracized by the entire aristocracy the next day. After all, there is a saying that goes, if you give gifts, your leader may not remember you, but if you don't give gifts, your leader will definitely remember you. The same thing applies here. Carlo may not remember who raised the glass, but he certainly remembers who did not. This is also a clever point of Jacobo. As the host, and one of the oldest and highest ranking nobles in Spain, he is certainly the most qualified person to say such words. What Jacobo had to do at this banquet was to guide the nobles to express their support and loyalty to Carlo on the appropriate occasion. So far, Jacobo was quite satisfied with his actions. The nobles showed respect to Carlo as planned, and Carlo's smile never stopped. Everything went smoothly. Jacobo thought silently. Carlo took a sip of wine and maintained a good mood, tasting the delicious food carefully prepared by the chefs under Jacobo's introduction. If most parts of Europe are food deserts, then Spain is definitely a shining pearl in the food desert. Not to mention the Iberian ham, which became very famous in later generations. The seafood risotto, stewed oxtail and grilled suckling pig alone are enough to make Spanish cuisine rank among the top European cuisines. There was a wide variety of delicious food, even filling up 2 long giant dining tables. But it was obvious that most of the people present were not that interested in food. Although this dinner was quite luxurious and sumptuous, the nobles' usual meals were not bad at all. The main purpose of this banquet was to socialize among the nobles, and many nobles had the same idea as Jacobo, which was to try to establish a relationship with the royal family through marriage. Marriages between European nobles were based on equal status, and the king's wife had to be at least the daughter of a duke. As for those marquesses and earls, they were basically excluded, and their daughters had no chance of becoming queens of Spain. Carlo still underestimated the openness of European aristocrats of that era. As soon as the banquet, several noble ladies came to invite Carlo to dance with them. If it was just an invitation, it would be fine, but their gestures and expressions clearly said that as long as Carlo wanted, he could have sex with them at any time. Among these women, there are not only unmarried young girls, but also sexy married women. That is to say, Carlo is always accompanied by 2 beautiful and sexy maids, otherwise Carlo may not be able to withstand such top temptation. Carlo was originally curious whether the husband of this sexy wife would mind, but when he turned around, he saw that the earl was chatting enthusiastically with the wife of another marquis, and didn't care about what was happening here at all. After seeing this scene with his own eyes, Carlo finally understood how open-minded the Europeans of that era were, and how decadent the lives of the nobles were. It is no exaggeration to say that as long as Carlo is willing, he can sleep with at least half of the noble women present. Because they have enjoyed a luxurious aristocratic life since childhood, these aristocratic women dress very beautifully and sexily, and each has her own merits according to their different characteristics. Carlo finally understood, while others became an unspoken secret among European nobles, because most people could not remain indifferent at such a banquet. Your Majesty. Seeing Carlo waving at him, Jacopo quickly gave up the two beautiful ladies around him and hurried to Carlo. Duke Jacopo, are your banquets always like this? Carlo asked helplessly. Jacopo thought Carlo was worried about whether the husbands of these noble ladies would have any objections, so he quickly explained. Please rest assured, Your Majesty, no one will care about what happened at the banquet, and no one will know. After that, Jacopo very considerately signaled another group of women to come forward and invite Carlo to dance. In order to please Carlo, Jacopo took great pains. These women had a variety of characteristics and can definitely suit anyone's taste. From girls who have just come of age to women of noble families, there is everything you can think of. The first group consisted of older women, while the second group consisted of young girls. Carlo shook his head helplessly, knowing that he couldn't keep refusing, so he could only pick a few girls who looked more pleasing to the eye to dance with. These girls were also quite bold when dancing with Carlo. But then again, it seems that no girl can resist a young, handsome king who owns an entire country. The temptation of becoming a queen is enough to attract a large number of girls to take action, even if there is no result. But to be honest, although these girls are all very distinctive, none of them caught Carlo's attention. Moreover, considering the interests of Carlo in Spain, it is highly likely that Carlo will not marry a native Spanish noble. Since he couldn't give these girls a result, Carlo naturally wouldn't take the initiative to provoke them. But if someone really came to him, Carlo couldn't just sit there and do nothing. After all, it wasn't illegal for nobles to have a lover. Although this was a large banquet organized by Jacopo, the nobles interacted in groups of 3 or 5 and did not gather together. It can be seen that the rank gap between the nobles is quite obvious. Dukes often get together to chat with other dukes, and some marquesses of high status might join in, but there are definitely very few earls get together to chat with earls, which best reflects the difference in status and influence of the nobles. As the earls were at the lowest level at the banquet, most of them could only gather together and chat with other earls. It is difficult for earls to chat with dukes. They have to wait until the dukes finish their chat and then find an opportunity to chat with the duke they want to chat with. Carlo was definitely the most conspicuous among the nobles. Carlo, and those below the dukes, could not even squeeze in. Carlo was in a very good mood as he held his glass of wine and listened to the duke's compliments and words of approaching him. Of course, Carlo would not be complacent because of some small flattery. The reason why Carlo was in a good mood was that these nobles were very sensible and chose to get closer to the royal power and truly support Carlo as the king. The nobility is definitely the most powerful force in Spain, and Carlo is bound to fully control this power. Seeing that the conversation was getting more heated, Carlo immediately put forward his own proposal, which was to establish a royal parliament and form a noble union under the leadership of the monarchy. The so-called royal parliament is composed entirely of nobles, and those above the rank of marquis are eligible to join the royal parliament. If Primo retires from politics in the future, Carlo does not have to worry about whether the new prime minister will support him. With the strong support of the aristocracy and the royal parliament alone, Carlo was able to maintain his influence on the government and ensure that he would not be completely sidelined. In addition to the royal parliament, Carlo also wanted to establish the royal knights to cultivate outstanding backbone military forces among the nobles. As we all know, the education of the elite aristocracy in Europe still attaches great importance to military affairs. Spain has such a large aristocracy, and the children of the aristocrats are also numerous. By forming the royal knights, they can select capable children from among these nobles to serve them, thus ensuring that the next generation of nobles will be sufficiently loyal to them. Truly capable noble children can quickly enter the army and get promoted by gilding their skills in the royal knights nobles. After all, not all noble children are capable. For those who are not very capable, the best way is to grant them honorary titles similar to royal knights, which can win the favor of the nobles without placing too much burden on the government and the royal family. After drinking a few glasses of wine, the nobles' thoughts became less rational. Under Jacopo's instigation, they quickly agreed to the establishment of the royal council and expressed their willingness to let their sons join the Royal Knights. After all, joining the Royal Knights is not a bad thing. Not only can you get the honorary title of Royal Knight, but it will also make it easier for you to be employed by Carlo, thereby gaining Carlo's trust and making the family's position in Spain more stable. The second update of 3000 words. Please support. Chapter 48. Worse than Prussia. Carlo was in a wonderful mood. This banquet solved the problem that Carlo wanted to solve most, which was to establish an institution to unite all the nobles and ensure Carlo's influence on the entire nobility. Although the nobles present were only a part of the entire Spanish aristocracy, most of the dukes with higher status and influence were present, except for some who were far away or delayed due to other things, such as the Duke of Serrano, who was far away in Cuba. If the royal parliament is announced, it will attract more nobles to apply to join the royal parliament. This was also an opportunity for the nobles to express their opinions. Those nobles who enthusiastically applied to join the royal parliament were naturally willing to support Carlo. Those who are unwilling to express their willingness to join the royal council are equivalent to their unwillingness to support Carlo, and their loyalty to Carlo is questionable, also coming to an end. In fact, according to the compensation draft signed by Prussia and France, the French government only needs to pay 200 million francs to Prussia. The reparations were not harsh and could even be paid immediately by France. But as the situation in Paris developed, the terms of the peace talks soon changed. Although the French National Defense government suppressed the first uprising of the Parisian citizens, it did not completely eliminate the Parisian citizens' increasingly fierce opposition to the National Defense government. Especially after learning that the National Defense government might cede French land, the citizens of Paris were furious and completely lost all trust in the National Defense government. The angry citizens of Paris gathered together again, and an uprising even larger than the previous one broke out. Although the National Defense government suppressed the rebellion very promptly, the citizens of Paris had no other choice but to resist resolutely. The demoralized French National Defense government troops had no advantage at all against the excited Paris National Guard. In fact, many government troops not only had no hostility towards the National Guard, but were treated like brothers and repeatedly passed on intelligence that was favorable to angry the National Guard. There are two very important strategic heights in Paris, namely Montmartre Hill and Saumont Hill. A large number of cannons and other weapons and equipment are stored here, and the National Defense government naturally does not allow the weapons here to be obtained by the Paris rebels. However, when capturing these two heights, a rebellion broke out within the National Defense government army. General Claude Martin Lecmond, who was responsible for the attack on Montmartre, not only failed to complete his mission, but was instead executed by his own soldiers who rebelled against him. The reason for his execution was that General Lecmond had ordered his soldiers to shoot at the Paris National Guard and ordinary citizens. As the uprising in Paris momentum gained, the French defense government was horrified to find that its own army seemed somewhat out of control. The army of the National Defense government was originally composed of insurgents, and the composition of the army was very complex. Newly revolted Paris National Guard more than the traitorous capitalist government of National Defense. Seeing the situation escalating, French Prime Minister Thiers of the National Defense government was so scared that he dared not stay in Paris any longer and chose to move the National Defense government to Versailles, more than 10 kilometers away from Paris. Why go to Versailles? Because there were still German troops stationed there. For the officials of the French National Defense government, they feared the Paris uprising army more than the German army, because the Germans would at most ask them to cede land and pay compensation. But the insurgents in Paris would send them to the guillotine and hang them on street lamps. For these French officials in the National Defense government, there is no need to think about which is more important, the loss of national interests or their own life safety. Bismarck, who was preparing for the coronation ceremony of the German Empire in Versailles, smiled. He did not expect the French to give him such an opportunity. Isn't this a free gift to the soon-to-be established Germany? Bismarck would not miss this good opportunity, and the Junker nobles in Prussia would not miss this good opportunity either. Prussia is a rather special country, and the Junker nobility has extremely high influence and status in Prussia. If France is a country with an army, then Prussia is an army with a country. How to get more land for themselves? Of course, they took the land from France and then divided it among many junker nobles. After all, the nobles were not philanthropists. They fought hard for King William I of Prussia for a reward, but the reward had to be paid by the defeated country France. Could Bismarck ignore the powerful junker aristocracy in Prussia? Of course not, and Bismarck to get more land from France. Bismarck finally spoke to Thiers again. Because the previous estimate of our country's losses in the war was wrong, I hope to renegotiate the compensation terms with your government and sign a new compensation treaty. This matter concerns the interests of tens of millions of people in Prussia and Germany. Please consider it carefully. Of course, I will guarantee the safety of your government and ensure that the uprising in Paris will not affect Versailles. Bismarck's meaning was simple. Either agree to more reparations and cede more land, and the Prussian army could guarantee the security of the French government in Versailles. Otherwise, Prussia would likely hand over the French government to the rebellious people of Paris. In this case, the fate of French officials can be imagined. The last time the Paris people revolted, they directly executed the king. Are the status of these officials more noble than the king? Under Bismarck's coercion and intimidation, Thiers had to agree, even if he was unwilling to renegotiate the compensation terms. After all, the rioting Parisians would really hang them on telephone poles. The Parisians were much more terrifying than the Prussian army. Perhaps the citizens of Paris could not have imagined that their uprising would make the government even more cowardly, and it was even willing to cede more land in exchange for Prussia's protection. But even if the citizens of Paris knew, they would probably only resist more fiercely, because such a cowardly government cannot lead France forward. France should establish a more equitable democratic republic. First update, please support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49. 5 billion compensation is freshly released. The Paris citizens' uprising. The French defense government quickly signed a new compensation agreement with the Germans. This compensation clause was more exaggerated than the previous draft, and the scale of the compensation alone reached a terrifying 5 billion francs. In mid-April 1870, the two sides signed this new compensation clause in Frankfurt, also known as the Frankfurt Peace Treaty. The treaty stipulated that France ceded Alsace and Lorraine, along with the fortress of Metz, to Prussia, and voluntarily gave up sovereignty over Alsace and Lorraine. In the next 3 years, the French government will pay Germany 5 billion francs in compensation, which will be converted into 3 francs and 50 centimes according to the Prussian silver coin 1 thaler. The reason for discounting it to Prussian silver coins was to prevent the French from paying less money by devaluing the franc. There is no doubt that the French can definitely do it. 5 billion francs is not a small number. Converted into pounds, it is still as high as 200 million pounds. How exaggerated is this concept? Today's main warships are ironclad ships, which generally cost between hundreds of thousands and several £100,000. If all this money was used to build ironclad ships, it would be enough for Prussia to have hundreds of powerful ironclad ships. Although building a navy is not that simple, it takes a long time to train naval soldiers, familiarize them with the operation of warships, and cultivate qualified combat capabilities. But this is enough to prove the huge amount of money. For Prussia, which had just defeated France, this money was like a timely help, which could help Prussia quickly build its industry and become one of the world's top powers. In fact, from this aspect, we can see that the French made great efforts to enable Prussia to grow into the German Empire and become the second power in the world after Britain. Prussia did not have a strong industrial foundation, so the French sent Alsace and Lorraine, regions with fairly strong industries, to it. The Lorraine region in particular has a large amount of iron ore resources. The Germans relied on the iron ore in Lorraine and the coal mines in the Ruhr area to make the German Empire's industry surpass that of France in a short period of time. Developing industry requires a lot of money, and the French also thoughtfully prepared 5 billion francs for the Germans. Also shows the heritage of old colonial powers such as Britain and France in some ways. The French needed to pay a full 5 billion francs in reparations within 3 years, which also meant that the Prussians believed that France had the ability to raise 5 billion francs within 3 years. In this respect alone, France has surpassed most countries in the world. At least Spain is not able to raise 5 billion francs at the moment. Not to mention 3 years. Even if it takes 10 years, it may not be able to raise it. Although he had long known that the French would need to pay a compensation of up to 5 billion francs, after actually learning the terms of the contract signed between Prussia and France, Carlo still couldn't help but be a little surprised and envious of Prussia. That's a full 200 million pounds. What Spain lacks most at the moment is funds, which is also the only factor that troubles Primo's reforms. After defeating the Carlos faction, the voices opposing reform in Spain have gradually weakened. However, due to the lack of funds, the progress of reform has been very slow, and it is impossible to realize Primo's expectations for reform. Fortunately, Primo was still rational enough. In addition, there were frequent rebellions in Spain during this period, so the reform plan formulated by the government was not too radical, and the overall trend of Spanish reform was still steady and progressive. After Prussia received a compensation of up to 5 billion, Carlo's desire to cling to Prussia became stronger. Today's Prussia or Germany has all the conditions to become a top power, and will be a top power in Europe for the next 40 years. If Spain could cling to Prussia and obtain its industrial and financial support, its reforms would be smoother. As for the support from Britain and France, Carlo had never thought about it at all. The British did not want to see Spain rise at all, because once Spain rose, it would inevitably have the idea of taking back Gibraltar. Gibraltar is related to the British control of the Mediterranean, and it is impossible for them to give up the occupation of Gibraltar. This also means that Britain and Spain have irreconcilable contradictions, and unless one of the countries is not among the great powers, it will be impossible for Britain and Spain to maintain peace. France is naturally needless to say. As a neighbor of France, the weaker Spain is, the better. No country wants to see its neighbor become extremely powerful, and the French naturally would not support Spain's reforms and industrial expansion. There is intense conflict between Germany and France, and the Germans will support Spain's reforms, even if it is just to cause some trouble for the French. Russia and the British had conflicts, so naturally they wanted to see Spain rise. But at this time, Russia was not much better than Spain, and its own reforms were not thorough, let alone providing financial support to Spain. The remaining Italy was able to come together because Carlo came from the Italian royal family, and because Italy and Spain had a common enemy, France, in North Africa. But the Italian royal family is originally a native family, and the only powerful country that can form an alliance with them is Germany. However, Carlo would not force a marriage. Although there were political considerations, Carlo did not want to marry a wife he did not like. If one could meet a marriage partner that one likes, and who can be helpful to the royal family in Spain, then everyone would be happy. A few days passed quickly, and Carlo did gain some results. The first is the situation of the Royal United Bank, a financial enterprise that Carlo attaches great importance to. Within a week of opening, the total number of depositors exceeded 5,000, with total savings reaching 29.13 million pesetas and an average savings of 5,787.31 pesetas per person. Although per capita savings have dropped from 40,000 on the first day to less than 6,000 now, it is a good thing for Royal United Bank. Because this represents an increasing number of civilian depositors, the Royal United Bank is gradually gaining credibility in the hearts of Madrid's citizens. After all, Madrid's population is not large, and the fact that it has over 5,000 depositors in a short period of time has proven the trust of the people. Although the nobles contributed more, the trust of the people was more of an encouragement to Carlo, at least proving that the Spaniard support for the Savoy dynasty and Carlo was gradually increasing. Second update, please support. Chapter 50 German Empire established. Of the peace treaty with France, there was no longer any external interference in the unification of Germany. However, it was not easy to transform the Kingdom of Prussia into the German Empire, because many states, including Bavaria, were worried about their own independence after the unification of Germany. The new empire was destined not to be as loose as the Holy Roman Empire. If Bavaria lost its independence due to the unification of Germany, it would be difficult for Bavarian King Ludwig II to accept. After all, although the Bavarian king who had no power and the Bavarian king who now holds real power have the same title rank, there is a huge difference in their influence in the entire German region. At this time, the situation in Prussia was not peaceful either. Many nobles, including King William I of Prussia, not so enthusiastic about the establishment of a new empire. Because after the establishment of the empire, the Kingdom of Prussia, which they were once proud of, would become part of the empire. The Hohenzollern family, as a royal family, might also abandon their old tradition of extreme frugality, and follow the example of those extravagant European monarchs to indulge in extravagance. Such concerns are not groundless. Although both emperors and kings were independent rulers, being the King of Prussia was completely different from being the Emperor of Germany. Becoming the German emperor meant that he had completed the task of unifying the German region and became one of only 3 emperors in Europe. The newly established German Empire would surely become an even more powerful power, with its comprehensive national strength exceeding far that of its longtime enemy, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and reaching the level before that of Britain and France. With such achievements, it is hard to guarantee that the Hohenzollern family would not become complacent, relax after a long period of tension, and begin to enjoy the luxurious life of the royal family. But some people opposed it, while others agreed, especially William I's son, Crown Prince of Prussia Frederick William Nicholas Carroll, father of William II, the Crown Prince, who was born in 1831, is now almost 40 years old. In Europe, where the average life expectancy is only 30 or 40 years old, Crown Prince Frederick is already considered middle-aged. Although there is no hope of succession in the short term, Crown Prince Frederick would also like to see a higher title obtained through the establishment of an empire. After all, who would be willing to be a crown prince for the rest of his life? With William I living too long, Crown Prince Frederick could only improve his title by establishing an empire. How long did William I live? Born in 1797, William I did not die until 1888, living for 91 years. This was extremely rare in 19th century Europe, and even in the 21st century more than 100 years later it was considered longevity. As the son of William I, Crown Prince Frederick had a rather tragic fate. Historically, Crown Prince Frederick did not ascend the throne until 1888. He died after only 99 days due to throat cancer, which led to him being nicknamed the 100-Day Emperor. It took 57 years from 1831 to 1888. 57 years of waiting only earned him 99 days on the throne. Frederick was definitely the most miserable crown prince in the 19th century. Of course, Crown Prince Frederick has not been diagnosed with laryngeal cancer and is still in good health. Under Crown Prince Frederick's insistence, William I agreed to the establishment of the new empire. But William I also made a requirement, that is, William I would only do so if other German monarchs proposed that William I become emperor. If Parliament asked William I to become emperor before other monarchs, William I would reject Parliament's proposal. His legal authority somewhat unstable from the outset. Among the many German states, the one most qualified to request William I to be crowned emperor was the Kingdom of Bavaria, the largest state in southern Germany. In order to speed up the establishment of the empire, Bismarck wrote a letter to King Ludwig II of Bavaria, asking Ludwig II to take the initiative to propose that William I be crowned as the German emperor. At this time, Bismarck had already agreed that Bavaria would enjoy a certain degree of independence within the German Empire, and that the Bavarian king would still have the right to command the Bavarian army in peacetime. The Bavarian government also had a say in foreign affairs, enjoyed financial privileges, and was not required to abide by Prussian military rules. They could retain their own laws on marriage and civil rights, and their own postal and telegraph services. This was already a huge concession to Bavaria. After receiving so many benefits and guarantees, Ludwig II naturally would not oppose the coronation of William I in this way. At the public request of Ludwig II, William I formally agreed to establish the German Empire, and was crowned as the German Emperor. The site for the establishment of the empire was chosen as the Palace of Versailles in France. Becoming emperor in France had unique significance for all Prussians. Prussia, the predecessor of the empire, defeated France, the former hegemon of Europe. This also symbolized Bismarck and William I's good expectations for the new German Empire, which was to replace France as the new hegemon of Europe. In May 1870, amid the hateful eyes of the French people, the complicated eyes of the French National Defense Government, the fiery gaze of the Junker nobles, and the fanatical shouts of the Prussian army, King William I of Prussia was officially crowned as the German Emperor. Called William I, the coronation ceremony was not complicated, and only nobles from several Prussian and German states participated. In order to prevent other powers from interfering in the outcome of the Franco-Prussian War, Bismarck and William I did not even invite the European powers, but only announced the establishment of the German Empire after the coronation ceremony. In Germany, the Germans of course cheered. But within France, the feeling is not so good for the once proud French people. Germany was established by stepping on the heads of the French. European continent today will affect the situation in the whole of Europe, including Spain south of France. First update, please support. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.